And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. Oh, what a fantastic crowd we have out there in the ideas from tonight already. Of course, tonight I am joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, it looks like Synchronicity City.
How so?
Well, we've got this Cosmos Club special report here in lieu of this deep episode I have coming up on the Cosmos Club and their impact on the UFO question. And voila, they're right on the verge of announcing UFO hearings for July. And there's a couple of interesting characters that are going to play off in that. And it looks like it's going to happen in Florida. But some of those characters down there, you know, get pretty interesting when you get into the space state. And there's an aerospace streak there that gets a little wild when you're on the Space Coast. We're going to get into that tonight along with the unusual UFO Bilderberg and all these meetings that are taking place among these groups, including Bohemian Grove. And Bohemian Grove, which has had that incredible influence on the political situation for over a century. And much like the Cosmos Club, maintains that power base in a kind of quiet fashion, although once in a while, I guess they get outed for what they're doing. I want to remind everybody, we're going to go about 2 hours tonight with this special report. And before we get started, I'll let you know that in the second half of the program, we are going to take your questions, and Miss Olivia is going to put those together as we speak, so you can ask them anytime during the entire lecture here tonight. How are we doing out there?
Doing great. Should we start with the most important thing of the week?
Well, there's a lot of most important things of the week. Go ahead.
The Caritas Terra wants to know about the green hoodie guy and the airplane freak out. Real or fake, in your opinion?
No, I think this is very interesting and important. And the fact that, you know, she's become the poster girl for either people who believe in what she was seeing or don't. You know, it's kind of fascinating, but there's a sort of sincerity to this woman who got up on a plane and was engaged in this conversation with this pretty strange character. And that story just whipped all over social media. The impact of people sharing that story, I also think is interesting beyond the actual story itself. But there's no question that she thought she was engaging with something that was a little bit not real. And, you know, we've heard about all this sort of NPC stuff that people get into, but we know that people at times have encountered people who would qualify as a little bit otherworldly, shall we say. But this guy, you know, looked like kind of a black hole when they got a shot of him. But I think the nature of her freak out and the nature of her just challenging the reality is interesting, whether you believe she was having an episode or not. And she did, in fact, storm off the plane. So we've seen a lot of weird plane incidents as well. So it's becoming like a new sort of showdown place. But it's interesting. You know, I never, ever, when we get into situations like that, blow off people or their reactions or the things that they see, because you never know what's going on there. And, you know, at times people can have delusions and all the rest, but it's not always the case. So we need to be very open to something like that, especially with someone who's kind of standing their ground on it.
Yeah, you said it. Actually, it reminded you of an X-Files episode.
That's really true. But then almost everything does nowadays. Tonight, we are going to get into some very strange material through the figure of John Wesley Powell, the founder of the Cosmos Club. And so we're going to swing wildly between 1860 and 2023 with all kinds of highs and lows in between. And the reason we're going to do that is much of the modern wave of the UFO thing that we've been talking about, if you get into the secret societies and how they've managed it, like the Cosmos Club, although it's a public, you know, thing, we're aware of it. It's like a stealth archive place where you have that sort of superficial glare on top. And I'm going to get into what the Cosmos Club is. Basically a DC haven for socialites and elitists. But on the surface, they have all these things that they do where they meet about social justice or, you know, scientific reasons and all the rest. But underneath, it's been known that ever since the 19th century, these people have gotten together and met up and talked about very secret things politically, astronomically, astrologically, and archaeologically. It just goes very deep and has a very strong connection with the founding of the Smithsonian. And Powell himself, we're going to find out, is very unusual as well. So now we've done some episodes outlining what the Cosmos Club is. I've put together kind of some very deep connect the dots things around them. Tonight, what I want to do is connect it with everything that's going on here that we're seeing. So we're seeing all this stuff and the attention that's being paid to these UFO whistleblowers and things. And the whistleblower part is in quotes because this is a weird thing, which is on one hand, you want the public informed about all the things that the government has kept hidden on the UFO file. But then again, you don't want to give them and let them fall into the false version. So what you have is people running over a cliff because they think they're getting the first thing. So what has to happen, interestingly enough, is two rather dramatic things. One is that the public has to, have this awakening about the UFO file. And then two, they have to realize that it's now that is being used against them and that we're getting a false version of what's going on here. So this is going to be, so many people are falling for the first part. And I think what happens when you get into that first piece is quite remarkable because that's what's been leading all the headlines and all the other things that we're hearing about. And it is a false version of disclosure. And this is tough because, people who've been into the subject for so many years, they've always wanted the real thing. And so when they see something that looks like the real thing, they run over a cliff for it. But studying the UFO file issue is crucial, especially in this era where the media just wants to give it to you. National Geographic is now saying, hey, aliens are real. That's bad, because they're still denying that there was anything wrong with 9/11, for example. And it was very interesting because the Washington Post just did a big thing and they were taking down RFK Jr. for a number of things he believes in. And then they're like, and yeah, he believes the CIA was involved in JFK's assassination. That's the level that the media is actually on. They still want to keep those secrets. So they're rolling out this weird truth in alienhood thing, the false UFO disclosure for a reason. And what you're going to find is the UFO file disclosures are hiding, the emergency powers are hiding behind the skirt of the UFO threat. And we're going to get into how that works, along with the big push for this biometric digital ID system, which will equal the end of freedom in the West. The two go hand in hand. But how does that relate to a group that started so long ago and is still going? Well, if you think the Cosmos Club is just the relic of another era, put it to you this way. The latest Supreme Court justice confirmed to the Supreme Court is a member of the Cosmos Club.
Mm-hmm.
So Justice Brown. Cosmos Club is very active, sometimes very too public, like when President Kennedy resigned. And other times very, very behind the scenes. And, certainly there's a superficial aspect where, the elitists just get together and all the rest of it. Very much like Bilderberg, but underneath there's some very hardcore things going on. We're going to get into some of the really hardcore things around the Cosmos Club in relation to this latest wave of UFO revelations. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist special report tonight here with you after the wonderful July 4th and all the, it was pretty rained out around here actually, but that reminder of America and the fact that the 250th anniversary of America is coming up, and that will be in 2026. And you want a constitution-loving president in office for that because you can't have this group doing any. If anything, they'll be dismantling America by then. The current group. And there's so much going on there with the Bidens. I think everyone wants to get us hooked on that cocaine story, so I'm not even going to talk about it tonight because I have a feeling that it's concealing something, and they know ultimately it goes nowhere. And so, they're like, oh, it's a little bad press, but they're doing something else. And I think that bad something else has to do with these cluster munitions that we're sending over to Syria, which in fact makes the Biden administration and the United States war criminals.
Don't you mean Ukraine?
Yes.
Okay.
And what's interesting is there's a couple of problems going on in relation to what they're doing with this. One of them is over 100 nations have signed on saying that cluster bombs are, basically a human atrocity because they tend to remain in the environment and civilians get blown up by them. And what this is a desperate admission by the Biden administration that the war over there is just a disaster. And what they've decided to do is basically give them these munitions as a way of just saying, like, we'll do anything to keep these guys going. And they're using the people of Ukraine as just human fodder in relation to this. So we're in a tough spot with that. But I think that it's interesting because here we see, and I have this whole section about RFK and how he's responding to this. There it is. Okay, so RFK Jr. says cluster bombs are munitions so horrific for civilians that more than 100 nations have signed an international treaty banning them. Now the Biden administration is preparing to send them to Ukraine. So they're putting us in a position where, the United States becomes the outlaw. And this is when the neocons are not playing with a full deck, and the kind of craziness that's sweeping Washington, the insanity that's going on here, win it at every cost. With a nuclear nation and the situation that we're in with no peace process, it's just a defense contractor's wet dream. And so we're in the worst possible position when it comes to that. The New York Times promoting this, being like, well, 100 nations say it's no good, but we have to do something and we'll help our friends. It's like when they came out with the terrible jobs numbers today. And this was great because all of the New York Times and the Washington Post and everybody were running for the hills to somehow protect the Biden administration from these terrible numbers. I mean, when you can't even create 200,000 jobs, it's pathetic. But what was interesting is they were like, steady job growth, this kind of thing. And so anyone who has a brain realizes that that's just an antic. So there's another interesting thing the Biden administration did, and it related to JFK. It's interesting, but the records, they've decided that instead of having this struggle back and forth all around with people saying we want those records, they've decided, we're just not going to release them ever. And that's it. There's no we'll kick it into next year. Maybe we'll do it. Now it's over. So RFK Jr. again, and we're looking at the setup here for election 2024 with these forces and with the positioning, even down to this issue. And President Trump had a very strong reaction to this as well. But anyway, RFK Jr. says, my uncle John F. Kennedy was assassinated 60 years ago, yet many of the documents related to his murder have never been declassified. Why are they still being hidden? It's time for the American people knew the truth. Now think about this. Think about all the people and the researchers and stuff that have lived and died, and the secrecy still hung out. And there was always an excuse for it and all the rest. And here we are coming up to the 60th anniversary of the JFK assassination. And now they've just decided, well, we're never going to release this stuff. So a lot of people who are aware on this subject, like Jefferson Morley, who I often cite around this, he goes in here and he makes a couple of very strong points. Late on a Friday night, Biden guts the JFK Records Act. Mary Farrell Foundation challenges president's order in federal court. On June 30th, President Biden issued an executive order asserting the 1992 JFK Assassination Records Act is no longer in effect. With the final certification made in this memorandum, and this is from the desk of Joe Biden, the last required under the act and definitive plans for future disclosures. My administration, quote, now this is Joe Biden talking, is fulfilling the promise of transparency to the American people.
Oh,
Biden declares. This is the sick little trick of saying, by keeping it from you, I'm being transparent. It's a weird sort of mini psyop in the language. While acquiescing to demands of national security agencies that portions of thousands of assassination-related documents remain out of view. Quote, On May 1st, 2023, the acting archivist informed me that the review process was complete. It's over because we're not going to show you anything else about the intelligence agencies assassinating the president. Now, this is pretty wild because a lot of them, just for face value, tend to stick to the thing like, oh, we'll release it someday, and here's this stupid thing about, Oswald in the Soviet Union. So there's so many questions to answer there, and there was such a push around the files at the end of last year going into this year that I think they became afraid of people paying a lot of attention on this. And so he says, now after he makes this declaration, Morley observes, in a statement released late on Friday before a holiday weekend, a White House spokeswoman claimed over 99% of the records in the assassination are publicly available, without mentioning that the temporary postponement means that several thousand assassination-related records remain fully or partially classified indefinitely. They include records on JFK's plans for reorganizing the CIA. That's the problem. Significant portions of Operation Northwoods, the Pentagon's false flag operation to stage violent crimes in the United States, and a CIA psychological warfare program involving Lee Harvey Oswald, the accused assassin who denied killing the president. Now, it's interesting that when this record passed, and I've seen this misreported all over the place in independent media and also in traditional media. The law that says that they have to release the records was passed in 1992. A lot of people are saying it was passed in 78, which was a different committee that said all the records have to come out by 2038. But then after that, there was a huge wave because of the JFK movie that Oliver Stone put out. And what that did was it said, look, by law, all these things have to come out in 25 years. It doesn't matter, how you handle it. That's how it's going to go. So that was the law. It came up during President Trump's administration. He let out a lot of records, but his CIA director, Mike Pompeo, who later turned on him, said, don't let that out. And in a weird interview recently about it, he said, oh, we should never let them out. And also, I've seen the UFO files. He starts going off. And I played that a couple of weeks ago. It's weird. Mm-hmm. Pompeo is very, very strange. And he also is big into getting Trump prosecuted now, which is a weird thing for a guy who gave him a job as Secretary of State and CIA director.
Oh, that's crazy.
But this whole thing represents then them stepping outside the law. 1, 2, just saying that we're never going to deal with this. And then 3, we're not going to mention the CIA part at all. So it completely just gets them out of it in this weird, this is what the Stepford Biden administration does. They just kind of sleepwalking. They're like, oh yeah, we might be in a nuclear war with Russia. Yeah. And you don't get any records and, you can't get a job without a vaccine, this kind of stuff. So they move through these weird motions to see basically what they can get away with. And their proclamations always have this kind of sugary, weird sugarcoating on top. It's like, well, we're being real transparent with you. You'll be safe not reading the records. Now, what's interesting is Biden voted for the JFK Records Act in 1992 as a Democratic senator. Great. So you get some weird stuff there. And it's a complete disgrace. And then you have to say, ultimately, what are they hiding? We know from Judge Napolitano that Trump told him you wouldn't believe what's in there. And later, now we have other people saying the same thing who are close to Trump. So for me, that's kind of heavy duty the way that it's going on. So they've launched a case on with Morley and Bill Simpich and some others who are part of the Mary Farrell Foundation, who've kind of been doing this for a while. But what's not mentioned in there, and it's interesting and something I point out, which is the Jim Garrison records are in there. And that's part of the batch that they don't want to let out. 1, because it shows the CIA interference in a legal trial, trying to get to the truth about the Kennedy murder. And 2, it also shows all of the investigation that Garrison did into the aerospace defense companies. That is actually the key piece in all of this, because it is, in fact, the aerospace companies that took part in the assassination. That was his conclusion, ultimately. The Central Intelligence Agency was the kind of platform, but it was the aerospace companies that were, 1, threatened mostly by his efforts around the UFO file, and two, in relation to NASA and the moon. And they could not have someone interfering with this system that they were setting up, which is largely a gigantic space grid to control things from above. And this is something that goes back to the German program for developing this. This goes back to Walter Dornberger and von Braun in Nazi Germany. That's part of the history that needs to be understood when we're looking at it. So when we're coming up with false disclosure pieces, we need to keep that history in mind, or else it doesn't make any sense, and you go into the lion's mouth of the same group that wanted to feed you into, the COVID, live in a concentration camp prison in your own home digitally, all by the magic of digital. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. This is a special report, and we're going to go into UFO Bilderberg revealed. I did mention that Bohemian Grove was meeting up, and Bohemian Grove, very famously, Richard Nixon said during some of his rants on those tapes about it that he couldn't believe what was going on there, and that it was basically one huge gay orgy that was happening. This is Nixon, and Nixon was a Quaker and stuff, and he might have been up to his own weird stuff, but this was not his cup of tea. And so he couldn't believe it. And we've had other people like Alex Jones go in there and film this gigantic owl, the cremation of care, where they, sacrifice any reason to care about anything. And so there's a lot of weird things that go on there, but a lot of people who've attended it have always, they end up in the presidency, and, Colin Powell was there, Bush was there, and all that. An interesting thing came up when I was going through some articles about Rockefeller, because I'm working on something important around the Rockefellers, which is associated with that whole blue secret space program 3-part episode thing that's coming up. And I don't know, it's probably going to take a few weeks on that one. But I'll tell you this in relation to it. This series of file folders may show that this literally might be the control file system of the Rockefellers in relation not only to the presidents, but in relation to the UFO file. I'm going to explain how. I want to take us back to 1980. There was a weird thing that happened in 1980 with President Reagan. And Reagan would, when he got in office, announce the Strategic Defense Initiative, which was the Star Wars program, which inevitably was going to shoot down any nuclear missiles that were coming in. And it was a shield so that, no country could attack each other in a nuclear fashion. This is an interesting way that he put this together. But in fact, one of the reasons he designed it was because he thought there was a UFO threat because of the ships and things that they were monitoring in space that didn't belong to us. Now, in this process, before he got into office, he had selected Gerald Ford to be his vice president. Now, this is weird, too. That was forced on him in the beginning. And Ford is a weird one because he had just been president, but not elected president. He had been appointed VP, and they got Nixon out, and then he got in, and then Carter edged him out. So he was going to come back as a VP under Reagan, which is a weird thing to go from president to VP. So, but Reagan was kind of satisfied with the idea that it satisfied both wings of the party, because he was, supposedly on the hawkish right side, and here was Ford as a moderate. And Ford also took part in the UFO hearings in Michigan and was served on the Warren Commission, and supposedly was the ear, the mole inside the Warren Commission for the FBI, feeding them all the details of the things that were going on. Now, at some point, there was a weird shakeup in there, and they said, you have to take George H.W. Bush on the ticket with you. And this was right before the convention. And it was David Rockefeller who came out there. Now, it was tough for Reagan because he wanted the support of the whole party, including the Rockefeller wing. And he said, but why Bush? Because Bush said my program was voodoo economics and we don't get along and all the rest. And interestingly enough, they shoved Bush in there. Now, what's pretty wild, that's David Rockefeller giving him those instructions. And in fact, Reagan would take the advice and put Bush on the ticket. Within 3 months of getting into office, they tried to assassinate him with Bush in the air, so that when Bush would come down in the plane, Reagan would be dead and he'd assume office. So this was the nature. They thought that Reagan believed his own rhetoric. This is what they were like, oh my God, he wants to end money and go back to the gold standard and all this kind of thing. But if you go back into that file cabinet that I showed you at the beginning, you find a very interesting card. Some of these came out. But this card shows that it says, this is a note from David Rockefeller to himself about Reagan. And he says, July 30th to July 31st, 1976, saw Reagan at Bohemian Grove. Now, this is interesting. So in order to get into that presidency, you have to meet with the Rockefellers at that juncture. And 76 was the Reagan versus Ford in the Republican primary. Ford wins out, but then Reagan comes back with a bang in 1980. So this meeting that they held there, so we have Reagan at Bohemian Grove, which is unusual because he's, more of somebody who kicked at the establishment. It wasn't supposed to be on the inside on that. I found a lot of that very unusual, and also that they mentioned that he died on July 4th in there. Very unusual, the connection. Earlier on, if you go into it, you're going to find, again, the Rockefellers hanging around this space question. And they had really got in the ear, as part of the Cosmos Club, they had got in the ear of Senator Kennedy. They were trying to recruit him as he was rising on the presidential front. And Kennedy said, I prefer not to come in with that, because I'm looking more on the working class side, and I'll build bridges with, every industry, but I'm not going to be seen as somebody in the hands. So what they do in the hands of the Rockefellers. So they showed up at this celebration at Harvard for him when he's a senator looking to become president. And that's David Rockefeller there. And again, they're on this big hunt to make sure that if he gets any power going, that, he'll be under their thumb. Now, it's interesting because they've become more and more disenchanted with him the longer he's in office. And at a certain point, David Rockefeller starts writing these hit pieces on him in Life magazine, saying he doesn't know what he's doing with the economy, and really coming out aggressively on him. So Kennedy has a meeting with Nelson Rockefeller, who was the governor of New York. And it's one of the only times they say that Kennedy really bawled somebody out in the White House. And you can see from the different pictures from that meeting that there's a problem there, and that the Rockefeller influence isn't taking in this regard. I think when we look at that, and then we see shortly afterwards President Kennedy resigning from the Cosmos Club, that there's a direct correlation to that, including the fact that this idea of a hidden secret society system running the UFO file didn't sit so well with him, this elite group kind of running things out in DC. And there's some interesting stories as well about Trump and Rockefeller that I think get into part of the trouble for what we got going there. So now, as we bring ourselves into this upcoming 2024 election, the UFO file piece keeps coming up over and over again. And we actually see people addressing it. Now, interestingly enough, Edward Dowd was that financial expert who got out of the system and started to show, the COVID op was one thing, and now the digital IDs are part of this human control system, and they're going to tank the economy and all these incredible things. This guy is remarkable. And he instantly caught on to the fact that they're going to use the UFO threat. Well, thank you very much, Dowd, because this is what we've been trying to outline on this program. And because there's a lot of UFO cultists, out there, they don't take the kind of deeper understanding on this, which is, it doesn't matter, in terms of the kind of I would say, feedback that you think you're going to get, the type of transparency or disclosure you're going to get. They're putting systems into place to basically control vast numbers of humanity. They basically want to lock down the entire planet. And anything that they can use on the emergency side is how they're going to do it. So this is something I want to point out, which is somebody like Dowd brings us that expertise from a financial angle. Well, it just so turns out that Dowd is now the co-treasurer of the RFK Jr. campaign, which means that RFK Jr. is coming in pretty strong on this. And what is he saying? He is saying, he's becoming very aware of the UFO threat aspect. If he has one good conversation with Dowd, he's going to know all about it. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist special report. This is the Cosmos Club, UFO Bilderberg revealed. We just saw how Bohemian Grove, with this very unusual, kind of control file system that they do with their, gigantic occult ritual out there every year. But big decisions are made at Bohemian Grove, including who's going to be the next president and so on. So if we hear now that during this weekend when this is taking place, if after this weekend we hear that Gavin Newsom was there, you can bet for sure that Gavin will be either VP for Biden, or they're going to just get Biden out of the way and include our friend Newsom. Grissom Newsom, who wanted to call martial law during the COVID up. What a guy. What a sweetheart.
Hal Colombo says, do you think Kamala will ascend to the presidency before election, i.e. Brandon quits? Tessa1111 says, Kamala will be appointed a judge. Biden retires. Newsom waltzes in. And Scarlet Fire says both Biden and Harris will be told to resign for corruption and face charges, and Newsom will be selected.
Yeah, there's a lot of wheels turning around this, but I still think on their side, the easiest thing is smooth sailing. So if they feel like they could get the corpse of Biden over the finish line for November 2024, they would do that. I think the stiffer they look at the numbers, the polls, the approval ratings hanging around 35%, and people seeing him, talk about how we're bombing Iraq or whatever. The wildest thing is when he just walks off. This is it's getting to be a public display. But unfortunately, the comedy goes out of it at a certain point when you start to realize, oh my God, this is the actual president. And you have to then say, oh, they realize it and there's a committee running him. Well, it was weird because in the late stages of the Reagan presidency, they thought this as well because they heard rumors about him slowing down mentally. Let me tell you, Reagan seems like Tony Robbins compared to our friend Biden. I mean, it's beyond, checked out. So I think that that's a dangerous thing to have this committee that we don't know anything about running this person, because obviously he's not making those types of decisions. Yeah. What do you got?
Well, Don Neway says Bohemian Grove and the infamous White House rent boy scandal. George Ivankovich says, I live 6 miles down the road from Bohemian Grove. It's all true, and it's happening now.
Yes. Well, 6 miles down, you're very close. So the radiation of that meeting is close by. There were a lot of scandals that were associated with this, Bush as vice president under Reagan, and this whole him bringing in this person who was the head of a call boy circuit and having them tour the White House late at night. Some very weird stories about Bush. There always have been. And we know that they were some of the biggest drug dealers. They made the Clinton drug dealing look like, amateur hour. The Bushes were always much more connected on the deep state side, on the mafia side, and the drug running side. They're just, it's a criminal group. And I think if anything, the Clintons were trying to be a version of them, and it just they've got their own corruption label, but they never got as big as the Bushes. All right. Okay, so when we look at some of these groups, think about George Washington here, and think about the influence, the kind of mystery influence of developing the United States and the groups that were involved. A lot of people would say, for better or for worse, that you know, this had happened and these groups had been involved. And you can tell that the main group involved on the founding of America are the Masons. There's no question about it. Washington being a Mason and many of the others. And there's a strain of that runs all the way through the American presidency. Now, you also have to see that one of the things that Washington is warning about are the Bohemian Illuminati. So there's another secret group. Now, fundamentally, when we look at these two groups, the Mason part on one hand and the Illuminati part on the other, and them fighting, on the surface, we as average citizens, unless you've studied it a great deal, as many of us have, wouldn't know what's going on. You just think there's some kind of a struggle going on there, but we don't know what it is. When you go into the mystery school literature around anthroposophy, around some of the things that Steiner is saying that the mystery schools run America at that point, which is 1920, that they run the political process in the UK and Germany and America. And then we start to understand that there are schools that are trying to move the culture forward, and then schools that are engaged in, really corrupting the environment that the republic is developing into. So you have those left-hand paths and right-hand path schools. And what happens is many of the secret societies we hear about are in fact the left-hand occultists involved in the political situation. So when you get involved with politics, automatically you're talking about esoteric influences. And when you bring that into the era that we're in now, and you realize the power that's gone on behind the scenes with the aerospace companies, because I'll tell you something, I hear a lot about central banks. I hear a lot about the Catholic Church. I hear a lot, about this group over here, but I never hear any examinations of the corruption inside the defense contractors and the aerospace companies and the power grab that's going on in relation to the UFO file through this intelligence aerospace corridor. This is something that we're bringing forward to you on a regular basis. And it has to be said that the companies that are making money right now in Ukraine, it's Boeing, it's Lockheed Martin, that's why there's this incredible push to keep that war going perpetually, because those are the guys who are cashing in. Well, when we talk about encircling the planet with Starlink satellites, who's gaining control and money there? Again, it's DARPA and, I won't even mention guys like Musk and all that, who are just the front men, the kind of Howard Hughes guys for this. So we need to take a deep look at what's happening in relation to the aerospace side of this, because if you don't get a handle on the aerospace intelligence side, you can't really see the power grab that's going on. I'm going to do it through a very unusual announcement about all of these UFO hearings that are coming up under Tim Burchett. Now, Tim Burchett is a congressman from Tennessee, and I actually think, after reviewing a number of his statements and things, that this is somebody who came into this with a genuine interest in the subject. I keep hearing about all these Congress people and senators who are into the UFO thing. And what I know is that they've heard something in the back, and in the back they've said there's a huge boondoggle, like there's a gigantic cash waterfall that's going to come, and it's going to come through all of this new technology, and all you have to do is get on board with it. And we can even make it look like a big moralistic crusade to get these people heard and get that damn government to give the technology up, which is ridiculous because they're all in the government and they're on the intelligence committees. So one of the things that needs to be put across is Burchett is in a very interesting place, because he's the guy who's been going out there, I think, fumbling around trying to get a handle on something. And they've been using him to get this whistleblower Grush some legitimacy, which he's had a hard time. They rolled him out with the Russ Coulthart interview. I'm scared. And they did this News Nation thing. News Nation just sits there and waves a flag for Grush. It's very strange. And News Nation is weird because it was founded by Chris Cuomo. Yeah, who wants to trust that? So they have a lot going on with Grush. And a lot of people who are familiar with the UFO file on a real level absolutely know that Grush is a complete op from top to bottom. Now, in this wave of UFO hearings, an interesting situation came up that suddenly a name popped up about someone who was going to be kind of co-anchoring and running these UFO hearings. And I didn't recognize the name at all. I started to think, what is this coming from? And also the name was kind of symbolic. It was Luna, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's get into some very unusual, strange things going on around this. This is Paulina Luna in the GOP primary for Pinellas House seat, and she won it. It was President Trump that endorsed her. And the whole thing was she's the first Mexican American and all the rest. Now, so she took some very conservative positions. And she really, she introduced legislation to impeach Merrick Garland, which I applaud her for, because Merrick Garland, has been weaponizing the DOJ to go after the Trump candidacy. Now, here is the comment from our friend Burchett, who's the congressman from Tennessee, who's been running around saying they're keeping this UFO secret and all the rest. Quote, myself, Matt Gaetz, who's also in Florida and also had some weird stuff going on, and Representative Luna, this woman, were briefed down in Florida. We were told we were going to get to see some things, in my opinion, at MacDill Air Force Base, which is where the next COG commander is coming from. But they were just not going to allow us to see any of it. They said we didn't have the clearance. I said, what clearance? We have the highest clearance and highest levels of clearance as congressman. For goodness sake, Matt Gaetz serves on the Military Funding Committee, and he represents some of the biggest bases in the country, which is true. But what he doesn't realize is that on the intelligence scale, you're nothing. You don't rank at all. If you're a congressman, you're just somebody who annoys them trying to get at the facts. Now, we've had some weird things going on in relation to this, which is, like I've said, this Congressman Gallagher, he's been out there and he suggests UFOs may be ancient civilizations. All right. And they've been using him as the spaghetti on the wall guy. He comes out and he says, oh, they're time travelers. Oh, they're ancient civilizations. So he's been watching the X series. There's no question in my mind. But Gallagher's a weird one, and he's one to watch because he's the one who's been going beyond everybody else. And so you feel like you're watching somebody who is very well versed in some of the types of subjects we talk about here. Burchett is a little bit different. He is center stage with all of it. But what they've done, unfortunately, is they've manipulated him. And I think that he has some genuine feelings about getting this out of the shadows on the defense side, but they've manipulated him into accepting Grush. And he said, I think what's going to happen is they're trying to give Grush a hard time. No, Grush is part of the op. They're not giving him a hard time. He's in like Flynn. As a matter of fact, something remarkable that came out was that Grush was in this UFO aerospace conference last year, and he was sitting there with Jay Stratton and our friend George Knapp and, Corbell and all that. These people were sitting there grooming him for this coming out thing that he did just recently. And that was last year. And, you can tell they did things with him. They tightened up his appearance. They did all kinds of stuff for this guy. It was kind of remarkable. Do you remember looking at that?
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
He lost some weight since then.
He lost some weight.
He got in training, right?
Yeah.
He had sort of a little bit of a makeover.
I think that's the word.
Mm-hmm.
And they knew that he had to be presentable and that there couldn't be, Elizondo, part of the problem, I think, with Elizondo is they didn't do much to polish his image. So anyway, what happened during the process of Burchett, hearing about Grush and then putting together these hearings is he's falling right into the situation. And so they've tagged on to his committee this woman. Now, it's interesting because I think in a weird way they're setting her up too, and I'll show you why. But that is Representative Luna, and now she is the co-chair of the UFO hearings that are coming up, you guessed it, in Florida, the Space Coast rules. Now, there's a couple of interesting things about Luna.
Do you have a picture of her in the bikini?
Right. There's a whole bunch of Sports Illustrated, hometown hottie Maxim type stuff with her. But before I get even into that, she's 34-year-old congressman. And like I said, she's taken all these kind of strong conservative positions. And, she's well-spoken and all this kind of thing. What's interesting to me is, why do you have her as co-chair on this? What's going on there? Well, it's weird because she's the one who has a very strong Air Force background. As a matter of fact, she's been involved with the Air Force since she was 19 years old, which I found pretty interesting. And if we go back a little bit into some of that history, she's worked in some pretty high-level positions after 5 years in the Air Force. So, and, like you said, she had all this kind of dicey stuff as well. Let me see if I can find this. Yeah, this is her before. No, I kid you not. This is her before being a congresswoman, and she was an Instagram influencer. There it is. That's her as Wonder Woman. Check it out, Miss Olivia.
Is that the worst you've got? Because I've seen the others.
No, wait, look at it. That's the one. That's in costume.
Love the outfit.
So, this is already there's a lot of colorful things going on here. Now, Luna, a member of the House Oversight Committee, said the FBI is worried its informant may be killed if their identity is revealed, talking about the Biden situation, the Biden bribery thing. Okay. And she went out there and put that on the record, and everyone was like, oh my God, like she's taken all the, chances by saying this and all the rest. Well, she was very familiar with that level of threat. Check this out. And then remember, this is somebody who got appointed to co-chair these UFO hearings. In secret recording, now this is from 2021, secret recording, Florida Republican threatens to send Russian-Ukrainian hit squad after rival. And what's going on here is there's a very unusual guy named Will Braddock who was running for her congressional seat, and he threatened behind the scenes to this other person who revealed it to the police to send a Russian-Ukrainian hit squad after rival. Quote, I really don't want to have to end anyone's life for the good of the people of the United States, but if it needs to be done, it needs to be done, Braddock says. This is one of the many changing faces of Will Braddock. And there's some weird things here, too, because he's connected to a major aerospace contractor. And it makes you wonder if he didn't want to be in that seat for some special reason, like he knew they'd have an in on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he wanted to be watching the documents on this UFO file.
Ooh, that's good.
Now, they go through a court case. She gets an injunction and all the rest of it. And little by little, it starts to come out. And he's basically taking the fifth and saying, oh, I knew nothing about it. But it's very clearly him talking about this. And he mentions some interesting things about who's on his side as well in this endeavor to intimidate this congresswoman. Now, check this out. In the recording, Braddock, early in the call, brought up the alleged assassins. He also made rambling statements about getting financial help from fellow Freemasons or by somehow importing millions of dollars from Malta and Gibraltar. I have access to a hit squad too, Ukrainians and Russians, he said about 3 minutes into the call, adding, I don't get caught out in public. Oh, don't get caught out in public supporting Luna. Luna's going down, and I hope it's by herself. So this guy was put in a very interesting position to sabotage her support, probably because they knew in this position she was going to be heading up the UFO hearings, and they wanted this guy to be in position. Well, when he heard that the case against him was going kind of rough, he fled to where? The Philippines. Well, interesting. Thane Eugene Caesar fled to the Philippines also after they thought that he was the assassin of Robert Kennedy. And remember that he worked for Skunk Works. So this whole idea around aerospace assassins and how they work and how this piece works and how the threat works behind the scenes, this is something that we've brought forward again and again. And the defense contractor link to how this government and this situation in society is manipulated gets missed a lot. And we always find ourselves going back just to the Fed or whatever. And that's good knowledge base to have. But let's not forget these guys that are operational here. After all, if it's a UFO threat, where are you going to go? You're going to go to an aerospace group. And also remember that in those records that the CIA is trying to keep in relation to the Kennedy assassination, if they want to keep the Garrison records, what did he say? He said the person who was involved in the shooting was a Boeing assassin, right? So he thought Boeing and the defense contractors had set this up. That was the corridor that was operational there. So this is where the story goes. American held for threat to kill, and that's, actually kill his political rival. This is the same guy who was running against her. So we can see how deep this goes. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show, going deep here tonight on the Cosmos Club, UFO Bilderberg revealed, and how these strange signatures for the aerospace companies and the secret societies come up whenever there's a deep event on the horizon. We're going to be taking your questions in part 2 of tonight's broadcast and really taking a look at on a full spectrum lens of what the things are that are going on here. What do you got?
What is her name? Luna, Congresswoman?
Yes, it's Paulina.
Something.
Paulina Luna.
Okay. Yeah. Everybody wants to see your bikini pics. So they're getting another.
Well, let's stay sharp. Let's stay sharp. One thing that she did is she did a couple of good things. One was introduce legislation to get rid of Garland. That was important. The other thing that she did that I think was useful was going after Shifty Schiff. Now, it's interesting because Shifty Schiff wanted to keep his position on the Senate Intelligence Committee so he could ram through this phony UFO file legislation. So I find this is part of that war that we're seeing behind the scenes. So there is one last news thing I'll read about Mr. William Robert Braddock III, who was a aerospace employee running for Congress who made all these threats to her. The U.S. Representative Anna Paulina Luna might be breaking out the good champagne after a nemesis who reportedly made a series of serious threats against her was apprehended in the Philippines earlier this month. William Robert Braddock III was arrested as part of a joint operation among the Philippines Bureau of Investigation, Fugitive Search Unit, FSU, and the FBI. The U.S. Diplomatic Security Service oversees criminal investigations. Braddock, as those who followed the chaotic race for Florida's 13th congressional district 2 years ago may remember, made a number of threats against Luna. And it's weird because Luna got an injunction against him, and then she also got an injunction against her uncle. And her uncle comes out and he starts showing up at campaign events and sort of harassing her. So there's something weird going on with this. And then suddenly, in the middle of all this, she's appointed to head up this UFO commission with the likes of Burchett, who, like I said, they're leading down the garden path to support Grush. And I think, if anything, he thinks, like, a lot of these people don't know anything about UFOs at all. They know the kind of fluff version of things. They have no level of the depth that people in the ideas room have on this. So when you think about it that way, a lot of them are just kind of stage actors. Others are literal props, like Marco Rubio definitely knows what he's doing as a neocon, setting up a false UFO threat. He's in a totally different position on this. But for me, when you're getting into that, looking at this is kind of like next level. If you thought the LUOP was bad, and it was bad enough, wait till you get to the stuff that they're doing to manipulate these hearings. And of course, we've got Rubio and Gillibrand ramming this through using the National Defense Authorization Act, connecting the UFO Defense Office directly to the funding of all military expenditures. And the military expenditures, if you hold them up, that's $1 trillion. So if you block the UFO Defense Office, forget it. You're not going to get any of that $1 trillion. So therefore, these guys have worked out a pretty good system. Now, our friend Gillibrand over here, she, of course, being the senator from New York, who used to be a Hillary protege. And it's interesting because not only did she get caught up in the Nexium scandal, which with Keith Bernier and all the sex branding and all that stuff via Hollywood, and Bernier got 72 years in prison for that. But it's interesting too, because her father-in-law was the head, he's retired now, of British Aerospace. So, they know the UFO file real well, and they've been consolidating. And that's why the nature of these hearings coming up is going to be so crucial to get to the actual facts, which means, not supporting and having our friend there, the Tennessee congressman, being, wow, Grush told me there are UFOs out there, and just sitting there with his mouth open, but really saying, Grush, are you part of an intelligence operation? Are you still connected to the government? You said you retired. Have you actually retired? So, and we need those tough questions for Grush too, from any media outlet that he's on, and not just sitting there and going, no more of the puppy dog, or I've been calling them poodle interviews versus watchdog interviews. So, the whole George Knapp and all those people just sitting there with this thing about Grush. They need to, for those types of claims, they better get serious. And this better be more than just a clickbait headline, because otherwise you're going to end up with, Dr. Fauci running the UFO file through his friend, Gary Nolan. And Gary Nolan's out there saying like, oh, I know all about those aliens, and Fauci is a great man. We have to get to the real thing around this, because there's a great knowledge base around the UFO file. But if we have the media circus version with the Congressional circus version run by the Central Intelligence Agency, you're going to have disaster. And like I said, it's just going to be the front. It's going to be the emergency powers hiding behind the skirt of this really kind of crazy UFO threat on the front. Okay. And this is interesting too, because these two stories go together. Yeah, I love this. Watch how these two go together. Two are crazy. UFO whistleblowers coming out of the woodwork. And they've got the Grush thing. And the person who's writing this is a big-time Barack Obama State Department personnel who's been basically ordered to go out there and direct the UFO file threat op. As one of these people who are really laying this down. So we have that. They're like, what's going on with the thing? As if you had to choose true or crazy. How about, no, there's true stuff involved with the UFO file, and there's false CIA disclosure. That should be the actual headline. Well, check this out. Exclusive Oversight Chair Comer says some UAP witnesses failed background checks. So in the middle of all this, Grush was getting into some trouble because of the things that he was saying were so vague in the interviews. It was starting to come out. And I made fun of those interviews. In one of them, I said, we found out that peanut butter was good, but, peanut butter and jelly is really good. And, we just have all this stuff, the weird language going on with Grush when he's like, yeah, you might say there are aliens. Yeah, you could say that. It's like, we're not saying it. Are you saying it? So we need to get to the bottom of that. And that's where a good interviewer, and not these fluff interviews, would really just blow that stuff to smithereens. And what's crucial, and that always gets missed, it's like Ryan Graves was the pilot who the TTSA rolled out. But what they didn't show when he was giving all these things about the Tic Tac and all that is that he's a defense contractor himself. He sells services as a defense contractor. So he's trying to package himself as a defense contractor that can deal with the UAP thing. So when he gives a bunch of interviews on CNN and all the rest of it, that's basically like sales jargon. because, hey, there's this new thing. It's UAP, and I've dealt with it. Well, it's a very easy matter of ethics to solve. All you have to do is say, I'm coming out to tell my story, and yeah, I can make money telling my story, big deal, but I'm not going to charge for defense contractor services related directly to the story I'm telling, because otherwise there's such an obvious conflict of interest that it doesn't even, anyone looking at that would instantly dismiss it as, oh, it's the guy's in it for himself. So that should be obvious. But for some reason, when you get around the UFO file, anything goes, basically. So George Knapp and Corbell put together this show, and it was all about these flares at the end of May. And it was a big bust. What they were saying was, oh, there's a triangle UFO attacking these Marines. We've been working on this story for 2 years. Here's the footage. Okay, so the footage has been put out there. It's been analyzed, and it was flares, and even in the military talk, it's flares. Now, there's an interesting thing going on here, because people like us who believe in the UFO file are now being put in a position where we have to debunk the junk. So it makes us look like, it puts them in a position that they've put us in. So they've hidden the UFO file for 80 years. And now they're taking the people who believe in it and they throw this junk out there, and then we have to debunk the junk. So we look like the people who are debunking the subject. That is classic intelligence agency psyop. I mean, there's no other way to put it. But they've been doing that. In any case, everyone agrees that they laid an egg on this. The analysis is already out there. Corbell and Knapp, who, is really getting more and more compromised. This is somebody who used to have a lot of news integrity. Forget it. Right now, anything that's related to the false CIA disclosure, this guy's all over it. He's still cheerleading for Elizondo, who's been, just a proven liar. So this is important, I think, when we size it up. These guys have been proven completely wrong. Now, you're not going to get any accountability. They're not going to come out and say, well, the person who fed us the footage didn't give us the full picture, whatever. It's been demonstrated, and it is completely debunked. It's junk. But they were able to roll that out there and get worldwide headlines and all the rest of it, because their job, their op that they're running, which is intelligence driven, is just to get this whole whipped up flavor of a UFO threat going. So there's no accountability anywhere. So, ordinarily, in an ordinary situation of newscasting, that's a career destroying move when you get behind something that's completely false. But in this environment, it's just like, hey, they're on to the next phony wave. Okay. Oversight Chair Comer says some UAP witnesses failed background checks. Now, Grush came forward and, like I said, was a little rocky. And so Marco Rubio came out and gave a big interview with News Nation again, who are the ones who are behind this, sudden fascination around Grush. And they say, well, what do you think, Rubio, do you think we can get this with Grush? And he says, look, if you don't believe Grush, I have other whistleblowers that'll tell you this. So they were already starting to switch lanes. But some of those people that were being submitted to Congress didn't pass background checks because they're just rolling out the people that are going to stick to the CIA threat narrative. All right. So House Oversight Committee, James Comer says some of the other witnesses House Republicans wanted to testify on UFOs are being replaced after some issues were flagged during their congressional background checks. Quote, it's pretty amazing some of the background checks we're getting back on some of these folks, Comer exclusively tells Ask a Poll. I know that we had to reshuffle the deck on a few occasions because of some real issues. While it's unknown why some potential witnesses are being replaced, probably because they have maybe an acting background and not an actual background. So Comer says former intelligence officer Grush and is still credible enough to investigators. He says House Republicans hope to hear directly from him and others as quickly as we can get the witnesses set up. So Representatives Tim Burchett and Anna Paulina Luna on my committee are the two that are kind of taking the lead on that, Comer says. It's interesting. It's not an issue I'm an expert on, so I don't know anything about it, but apparently Burchett and Luna are, so they're really excited, and our staffs are really excited about it. Here's an interesting thing about Anna Paulina Luna. her husband is special ops, and he deals with special ops for the Air Force. That's also interesting. So how in fact is she qualified to be the co-chair for the UFO invest? Is it through her husband, or is it through her years in the Air Force? Which, she was in the Air Force when she was 19 through the age of 24. But then she didn't have anything related to any of this. There's like 10-year gap there. So something odd about the connection, I think, in relation to those two being chosen to run it.
Do you know anything about who funded her campaign? Like Bigelow, for example?
No, Bigelow wasn't involved in her campaign, but we know that he's a big supporter of Ron DeSantis' campaign. But what is interesting about her is the heavy duty conservative positions she's taken. And for me, basically, I think that they were looking for someone on the congressional side that could walk that walk on that. And I don't even know if there's anything wrong with what she's putting out there. I'm seeing how these people are being put into position. So ordinarily you would think, the chair and the co-chair of a UFO committee would be like military oversight people. This is a little bit, Burchett, who's being kind of naive. And then they put in this other woman who, doesn't have any, I don't think she's ever mentioned UFOs before in her life. So for me, that's unusual, shall we say. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is a special report, and it's great to have so many of you here with us. Cosmos Club UFO Bilderberg revealed. We talked to you a little bit about Bohemian Grove, which is going on this weekend, and we've got that general setup for a big special that we're doing on the Cosmos Club. I wanted to give those tracks because we've done some shows about the Cosmos Club. That's what I've called UFO Bilderberg, and I think that we need to look for where the staging aspect of this with the UFO hearings and Grush and all the rest of it is going. We're going to be taking your questions here shortly because I've already run overtime because this is supposed to be a 2-hour report, right? But we will take your questions in about 15 minutes. And we have some exciting things coming up for you as well for July, including X-Series episodes. The X-Series comes back at the end of the month. In the meantime, we're going to have some great special reports and interviews coming up for you, as well as some things that we're working on in the background. Make sure that you're on that free newsletter list because you'll hear all about the documentaries and events and incredible guests coming up for you, along with remarkable X-Series shows. You go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for that. That's the best way for us to stay in touch through this remarkable, and I mean remarkable, censorship that we've been up against. And with your help, we're doing pretty well with it. Before I go any further, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
David Termina says, DJ, in 2019, Salvatore Pias, who's currently in Space Force, and the U.S. Navy patented all the advanced UFO-style technologies. How do you suspect this connects with all these recent UFO ops?
Well, there was a huge cleanup process recommended by Rubio and Kirsten Gillibrand, and they added this the last minute into this legislation on the Senate Intelligence UAP side. And what it says basically is if you're a government contractor of any kind and you have any exotic material from a UAP related project, you have to bring that in here and under our central umbrella, because if you don't, you'll be subject to prison and all this other stuff. So that, that's a pretty good nasty gram to get if you're working on these programs. It's also odd. It's a very odd thing to do. It shows that the consolidation around the UFO file is taking place. And what they're hoping to do is copyright, C in a circle and TM for anything UFO related, which is why, since TTSA, you've been seeing that ridiculous Tic Tac picture instead of other pictures of UFOs. They're always using that dumb thing. And we know now that all of that footage is completely a manipulation. It's a radar manipulation. And but one of the other things that are going on in relation to this is whenever they show something now, it's copyright Corbell or whatever. So they want to consolidate the UFO file so it's not an open thing. It's not an open source system. They just consolidate it. It's like the central bank digital currency. And I was thinking of the comparison on this because I was like, wow, the people who are against the central bank digital currency, might still be into different types of crypto or whatever, but they don't want that central bank thing coming up. So they're pushing against it. But in the UFO field, everyone's like, hey, the CIA is here to give us the UFO threat. All right, they're going to give us disclosure. And you don't have that resistance group like you do with the CBDC. That's a problem. So whenever you compare it with other things, the same group that used to be like, so anti-government on this and kind of aware, on the UFO side has just completely fallen over and been like, I love the Homeland Security. So it's weird. It's genuinely weird. And I've said in some cases it's like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but I won't go off on that. What I am noticing more is people understand property and they understand intellectual property and all the rest of it. And when we put it in those terms, I think people get it, because then it's like, oh, they want to control it so that they control the rollout of what it is. So they're gearing up. Like I put together an episode last week that was the breakaways breaking back in, right? So the breakaways have the technology. They've been developing it out of sight for 8 decades, at least. With the Cosmos Club info back, we're talking all the way back to the Civil War. But those breakaways coming back in, they have a kind of a mastery around some of this, and they need a way. Then that kind of centralization coming with the huge profit margin is why you see all these congressmen and senators lining up and being like, that UFO file, we need it now more than ever. And the great shame of it is the UFO issue is very important. The subject is mysterious, and it carries with it implications politically. It carries with it, metaphysical implications, all sorts of things. I've pinpointed this whole apotheum aspect, which is if you research deeply enough in looking at this, you will see that there's something associated with the phenomena. And the association is, something takes place that if you read some of the work like John Mack and go deeper into it when people were very seriously doing the research, you see weird things like people being abducted through objects and things like that. So there's a complete physics defying thing that takes place. Missing time, all the things that are associated with it, disruption of electronics and all the rest of it. You're literally encountering something totally different. So it is a kind of a physics distortion that takes place. It's a total reality distortion, physics inside this effect. And I use the term apotheum to capture it. But basically what they have inside of the UFO file is the X technology. And when you deal with the UFO file on one hand, or if you deal with the X tech, and you can have that through Tesla's work, you can have it through the things they preserve through the mystery schools, John Keely's work, there's a suggestion of this other thing. Then, T.T. Brown's work would certainly fall under that as well. Then you get a handle on it, which is that the fear on their part and the reason that X Protect exists in these things is not so much that there's an alien race out there, and that humans couldn't accept it and would kill each other. It's not that. I think that they can't figure out how to consolidate all of the military advantages involved, or the financial ones, which is the same problem that they had when Tesla was like, hey, I can make all this energy wireless. And the same way I make communications wireless. Well, that's no fun. Then nobody has to pay for the oil paradigm. That's a big problem. But from what I understand, when they do the really deep research around the UFO technology, they're not sure if they can control it so that it doesn't come back on them, that it doesn't boomerang, the effects that take place. So that's something that I think we're still in the mix on. So it gets to be a dangerous situation. Now, it's interesting. Everything is playing out in Florida. Luna's from Florida. Burchett is holding the hearings in Florida. Gates, who's part of the hearings, he's a Florida congressman. And Trump, the raid in Mar-a-Lago, I'm sure there's something related to the UFO file in that search of Mar-a-Lago and in all these cases that suddenly sprang up out of nowhere relating directly to files that should have been in the National Archives. And then you, like I've pointed out before, you have DeSantis down there as the governor. And what's the big thing going on with DeSantis? Robert Bigelow is spending every dime in his pocket to get him into office. Robert Bigelow said, I'll eat cheese for the rest of my life and go broke if I can just get him into office. That's weird. Explain that one for the big UFO enthusiast to, want DeSantis in there. Why does he want DeSantis in there? It's a real question. Well, here's something that Trump put out that I think is again, part of that background consolidation of communication between the RFK Jr. campaign and the Trump campaign. Trump puts out, when I return to the White House, I will declassify and unseal all JFK assassination related documents. It's been 60 years. Time for the American people to know the truth. And he retweets on his Truth Social, the RFK Jr., it's very disturbing that Biden refused to release more JFK assassination documents. Biden agreed to make public a majority of assassination records, but thousands remain secret 6 decades later. That's Trump. That's today. So a lot's going on there, and it's all coming out of Florida. Watch Florida. It looks like Florida is the flashpoint for the 2024 election. And of course, Trump came out in Florida saying that all the charges against him were bunk and all the rest of it. I think that just to a little more commentary on 2024 election here, if you allow me.
Sure.
If I may be so bold. I know I'm going off on a tangent.
I do have another comment about Florida.
Good. Hold it just one second. RFK Jr., at this point, his campaign, he's learned a few things already, which is when he communicates directly in relation to Biden and what a terrible job Biden is doing, his poll numbers go up. 2, that when he is allowed to talk, that, people are getting this education and that there is a real opportunity here, but that the DNC is completely cooked against him and that Biden will never debate him in a million years because they'll have to roll him off stage in a wheelchair. So he's up against a very, very difficult thing, which is to get the Democrat nomination. In the background, there is this push and pull with this idea that he could be Trump's VP, which he already said, I'm not interested in doing that. But I think fundamentally, when it comes to what's going on, the first thing that we need to get is RFK Jr. as the Democrat nominee and Trump as the Republican nominee. Then you have 2 major, constitutional candidates. That would be a major shift in everything that's going on. Instead, they're talking about, well, if Biden falls, Newsom in there, and Newsom would be, like Biden, but more psycho. And, there's no improvement there. So it's the Biden administration. If you look at it, you can really sum it up by thinking about the forces that are coming in on the Trump side. And it's, he's gaining. He's actually 6 points ahead, 7 points ahead in polls everywhere against Biden right now. The economy is trash. They're getting us into nuclear war. They're lying, all the rest of it. And then on the other side is an incredible legacy and the dynamic personality of Bobby Kennedy Jr. bringing the truth out, bringing the transparency, even on the UFO file front. And the 2 forces are crushing this regime that's in the middle. And that's the force that this is what's shaping up to 2024. And I think that scares the daylights out of them. I think in the background, they're prepping the emergency powers through some kind of a threat. They've thought about the nuclear threat. They've thought about cyber defense, but the UFO file threat is the one that is at their fingertips at the moment. And they're also thinking this one, hey, it drives a lot of revenue because we have this whole UFO threat office. Remember that Van Herk came out and that Trump trashed him And Van Herk is the COG commander. He came out and said, "Oh, we always have had Chinese balloons going across America." And Trump said, "Not when I was president. They weren't." So Van Herk, and we know Van Herk's weird comments about, as I've pointed out on this program, Van Herk saying, "Oh, I don't know if it's ET, the things that we're shooting down over Canada and all the rest." No general in his right mind would say that. That's a prep for the whole UFO thing, but it didn't get him anywhere because Biden nominated somebody to replace him as COG commander who's going to be more hardcore and is going to be way more into the UFO threat thing. And you're hearing, as I've pointed out last week, these things going on, like out of nowhere, this head of NORAD, Van Herk, is saying that the people at Space Command are a bunch of trashy liars. That's weird. That's really weird. And keep an eye on that. If you think you had, an overthrow situation going on in Russia a couple of weeks ago, watch out for when the COG march is on, everyone. Yes, what did you have?
All right, election first. David Terminus says, DJ, how is it that Gavin Gruesome has a very tight attachment to Nazi SS Otto von Bolschwing, who did business in Argentina while mentoring Gavin's dad, gets away with the fact not plastered to the wall?
Well, there's a long history of that in California. This is a weird thing. That's a good point, though, because what we have is, I'm trying to think of the governor. It's Gray Davis. And Gray Davis was the governor who was before Schwarzenegger. And it was discovered, if you read the book Trading with the Enemy, which is all about IBM and all these other companies doing this business with Nazi Germany, you're going to find Gray Davis's grandfather getting, all of these deals through the Roosevelt administration for business with the Nazis, and then the Roosevelt administration finding out and saying, like, you are out, and him continuing to do it through all these different ways and means, and just in tight with the Nazi regime. And then the grandson comes out and becomes governor of California, and then he's going to run for president, but a weird thing happens to his voice. So, but there's a weird crisscross between the paperclip piece, and the Nazi background with California governors, and including Schwarzenegger, whose dad was a Nazi. But yeah, very interesting. And they've been protecting Gavin since he was mayor of San Francisco. He has a halo there, but I don't know if it would survive through a real general election piece if you look at it through the lens of how powerful the independent side is going to be in this round, which is why it's important for on the Bobby side for them to really get there and to take the gloves off against Biden, which he's starting to do. And it's a crucial thing to do. It's not personal. It is saving the country, and getting rid of Biden is saving the country. Couple of quick comments here. Speaking of Kennedy says, everyone ready for another regime change war? Caught this very interesting comment from Biden. And he said, that's what Biden seems to be signaling when he agreed last week that Assad must go, whether or not he meant it. The National Security State mouthpiece, Josh Rogan of Washington Post, was quick to agree. Biden tells Syrian activists he still thinks Assad must go. Remember, they were pushing this whole thing, and there's like, oh, the red line, he crossed the red line. And they could not, the neocons could not get Syria in the package. So they moved on Ukraine and got the war going with Russia and all the rest of it. But now they're like, you know what? It's not going so well. Maybe we should go back to this Syria thing and then take over Iran. This person running the United States is out of his mind. The weird committee that's running him, this guy's living in another time zone. And the committee that's running him are just all neocons. So if they're not stopped, they literally will set the whole world on fire. So, if anything, Bobby has to replace him as the candidate on the Democrat side, and Trump has to be on the Republican side. If it's, if it's Biden who shows up as the nominee, which is a nightmare, then Trump definitely has to be on the other side because he's the only Republican who can take him. The other point on all this, which I think is crucial, which is Christopher Mellon's been in the background promoting the whole crisscross around the UFO threat piece. I want to point this out that he is really trying to maneuver the Grush situation around genuine scrutiny. This is what the real problem is. And I want to go back to this because the whole UFO whistleblower thing is right in the heart. It's right in the center of this situation that we're gearing up to for the 2024 election. Christopher Mellon, who we know was the defense intelligence leader under W and also had worked for Clinton before that, and then got out and promoted Elizondo and all that nonsense. Now he's saying David Grush and other credible individuals have provided the intelligence community, IG, details about an alleged program involving recovered ET technology. Since Aero does not have this information, Congress ought to ask the ICIG to assess the issue and report what it learns. This is interesting. What he's trying to do is safeguard Grush from any real scrutiny by just putting him directly through the intelligence community inspector general thing, which is all big CIA protection route, instead of having him go through normal questioning channels like the thing that they set up, the UFO Defense Office. Even that, Grush can't survive under any real questions. So what they're saying, what he's pushing as the promoter of Grush now that the Elizondo thing has gone by the wayside, is they're trying to shepherd this false story that this whistleblower is telling. And they want to make him sort of the harbinger of this idea that the CIA is giving everyone disclosure. So that's the dangerous piece, I think, in the middle of all this coming out. And if anything, like I mentioned with Edward Dowd being the treasurer of Bobby's campaign, and Edward Dowd being very aware of the whole alien threat aspect and how the money works around that, there he is, new controls with alien threats. That's the co-treasurer of the RFK campaign, Dowd. So don't tell me that Bobby's not aware that his co-treasurer is giving interviews about how the Biden administration is going to use the alien threat. This is hardcore stuff, I'm telling you. So watch this and watch Florida and watch our friend Luna. Because Luna, they have put to be the co-hostess of the UFO file hearings, and there's all kinds of wildness in that. Now, I have a whole section here that I'm going to do just linking up the Cosmos Club with this. Before I go, Miss Olivia, into that, what do you got?
Kontiki Man says, does DJ know Chinese space exploration technocrats have formed their own Cosmos Club? I won't even try to pronounce it.
Yeah.
Wonder how they will handle the UFO file. I guess Red Koala Panda is what they're called or something like that.
They do. They're calling themselves the Cosmos Club. I think that's just an homage. Look, here's the interesting thing about the Cosmos Club. Early on in the early 70s, they booted J. Allen Hynek because Hynek had dropped the whole Project Blue Book nonsense and got in with the real thing. And what's fascinating about that is the person that they used, that they were like, we're going to make sure that you go down too, was Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan tried to stand up for Hynek and say he deserves to be here and everything else. And Sagan was a very respected astrophysicist. And, the Cosmos Club has that deep history. It's got that overriding kind of occult imagery embedded right in its founding. And the founding, as I've related in a couple of episodes previously, I haven't gone as deep as I'm going to in a special report I'm doing on them coming up. But I want to show something tonight about how in their founding, there's a very important piece that may have been missed, which is that when it was founded by John Wesley Powell, it's very possible that in his archaeological research, he found something that had tremendous technological significance. And that is the reason for the incredible power base of the Cosmos Club in its endurance through 170 odd years, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. Now, John Wesley Powell is an American geologist and the first director of the Smithsonian's Bureau of Ethnology. He made several expeditions funded by the government. By the way, he was a self-taught scientist. So it was a little bit, shall we say, interesting that Powell was getting this level of funding. Then he finally became their entire go-to person for the Department of the Interior, which shows up over and over again whenever we get around any controversies involving John Wesley Powell. Powell is here speaking with the Paiute shaman, and he studied the Native American mysticism to figure out what was going on in the Grand Canyon. And you can also notice there that he has one arm. That's because he lost an arm in the Civil War. And it's very interesting because if you look at where he was stationed during the Civil War and remained for 7 years, it's a little place called Cape Girardeau, which UFO enthusiasts are very familiar with because that's where the first major UFO crash and crash retrieval happened in 1941 with Harry Truman as senator. So a lot of things there. Well, I'm going to tell you something. When you look at the Aztec UFO case, then the study that we did on it 2 weeks ago, what do you find? You find John Wesley Powell was in Aztec, New Mexico, and there's actually a kind of a semi-shrine to him there for what he was doing in New Mexico. So you've got this character who is founding the Cosmos Club and using all these Egyptian terms like Osiris Peak, the Isis Gate, Horus in the sunlight. And he's at the birthplace of two of the major UFO cases. The only place I didn't find him in was Roswell. But there he is in Aztec, New Mexico, and there he is in Cape Girardeau. So he proposed the name Grand Canyon, and he coined historically and mythically inspired names for temples and towers, including those of Isis, Osiris, Horus, Ra, Set, who kills Osiris, if I'm not mistaken, and the Cheops Pyramid, and Shiva for some of the outstanding, poignant geographical features and sites in the canyon. Now, there's a whole thing about a forbidden zone that he set up. And the forbidden zone was, where you couldn't go in the Grand Canyon when he was first outlining it. The high points, summits are in the Haunted Canyon, Trinity Creek area of the park and include geographical formations. The Tower of Set is one of those. Now, many of us are familiar with this whole thing about the Grand Canyon Egyptian ruins. And there have been some pretty decent books in relation to it, and studying the original articles, I think, gives us a lot of background that basically the Smithsonian locked this story up. But remember the connection again when we get to the Cosmos Club and the Smithsonian. You're talking about a twin agency here. And remember that the person who was in the middle of setting these things up and thinking, what I'm going to do is go down the Colorado River, I'm going to discover America, and he's being funded to the hilt, but he's deeply steeped in all of this mysticism. And the fact that he's relating everything back to the stars gets interesting. But if we start to look at the possibility and the potential that the Cosmos Club, Powell, and all the rest of it is founded on the idea, and there's support for this, is founded on the idea that they discovered something in their researches that never hit, the history books, the archaeology books, and stayed in that incubator of this secret group for a number of years, which gave it that power. This individual, by going cross country and creating, these diaries and putting together this scenario in the groups that went with them, it's a very fascinating story. And I'm going to do a very complete overview on the Cosmos Club coming up that'll go even deeper than the things that I've presented in the past on them. What I want to put across is that there's a crisscross there with this society, and with the Cosmos Club, what's going on around the UFO file. This is part of the things that's been going on in the meetings. They've been planning, how do we do this rollout of this advanced technology? Now, let's go back to this Grand Canyon thing for a minute. Grand Canyon and ancient Egypt's connection. There was a guy named Philip Coppens, and some people might remember him because he did a lot of very interesting things relating to ancient civilizations, ancient technology, the UFO file. And I always thought he was good. He died young, and he also, I think he was only 41 years old when he died. And he was really getting a lot out there. One of the things that he got out there was that he claimed to have traced a number of the artifacts that came from the Grand Canyon Egyptian excavations that were put in the Smithsonian. And so some of these I'll just show. The Egyptian urns found in Powell's Cave in the Grand Canyon are now on display at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. And what he was suggesting back there is that things like the excavations and the expeditions to the Grand Canyon later on that came up in those articles from 1909 were all based on the fact that the Cosmos Club had got there first. So people knew already through the work of Powell. Although he doesn't trace it back to Powell in his own work, but he traces it to the earlier expeditions that took place there. Now, what they found there is a great question, and there's a lot of suggestions in those articles. And if you go back there and look at some of those original articles, explorations in the Grand Canyon, mysteries of immense rich cavern being brought to light. Jordan is enthused. Well, it's interesting because one of the things that I showed, which was that the Jordan, it turns out, was David Starr Jordan. He was the person who was involved in the archaeology around that. And his close work with the Smithsonian is the reason that we get this. Starr Jordan is interesting, though, because he was very, very deep into eugenics. And his main title, when he was in the process of helping to develop Stanford University, was he had something at the university called the Astral Camera Club. And their whole thing was to use photography to take pictures of the astral plane. So this guy was dealing on a major level. And later, after he'd already been with the Smithsonian for 12 years, when these stories started to break about him being a eugenicist so much later, and the connection, one of the connections that was starting to happen, I think that they got spooked and that they thought, maybe we're going to get found out on this. And they started to disown the fact that Jordan never was there at all. But enough researchers have found all these references to Jordan in their papers. Now, here's something claimed by Coppens, that these gold artifacts from the Kincaid Tunnel are the only artifacts on display in the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. from the Grand Canyon. The two back artifacts are actually from ancient Egypt, but all the stuff in the front supposedly is from the Grand Canyon and was actually being displayed. That's pretty wild. So when we take a knowledge base on the mystery side and we say, well, what did Edgar Cayce have to say? He said, well, yeah, the Atlanteans moved into Egypt and buried the Two-Eye Stone under the Sphinx in the Hall of Records. Yeah, but he also said they went the other way. They went to Yucatan. And then if you track those readings, they go from Yucatan and travel up to Utah. They travel to Nevada, and they become the foundation of those civilizations there. So when we have this, the Atlanteans founding the Egyptian civilization, for them to come over here and be in the Grand Canyon is not a great stretch at all, as long as you're considering a central culture as the bridge, the culture bridge. And that's what we're getting in the Cayce ratings. So let's take that a little further with exploring Powell, and then we'll get to your questions. We'll get you the questions in 5 minutes. What do you think?
Sounds good.
All right. How are you doing out there?
Really good.
Give me something that you have there.
T-Star Illumination says, who are the members of the Cosmos Club? Members have included 3 presidents, 2 vice presidents, 14 Supreme Court justices, and 36 Nobel Prize winners.
You've got Pulitzer Prize winners. You've got people in physics like Edward Teller. You've got multiple CIA directors, including William Colby. No, you have some of the best, think tank people on Earth coming through the Cosmos Club. And really, if you think about it, one of the things that's interesting, I pointed out before, is that John Warner IV, who was the son of Senator Warner and Catherine Mellon of the Mellon banking family, when he's come on this program, by the 3rd time he came on here and we were doing shows about the Cosmos Club and things, they offered him membership, which I think is hilarious. They're basically like, let's get that guy to stop talking to Dark Journalists and get him in some of these, basement meetings here at the Cosmos Club. We could use that Mellon juju, we need that whole vibe of the real elite families to help us go. And what's interesting is, they should have realized it, but John didn't have any interest in doing it at all. So let's track this for a second. Casey has this group going with their advanced technology. They go into some of those very places on the Colorado River Trail, and they set up a new civilization. Mound builders, when we come out of that. But he's suggesting that they're in a diminished state, but that they try to rebuild an Atlantean-style colony. Now, we have weird stories about tall whites out there in Nevada. And all those stories come in directly. There were stories about the tall whites before, but Charles Hall and his experience, I think, is noteworthy. And I've pointed it out. And he has a series of books. This is one of them, but it's Millennial Hospitality, and it just goes through the whole thing. Now, I do think that they, in the editing of the books, his wife cleaned it up a great deal, because I think that they thought too much was going to come back at them as blowback for putting the information out. But his story, we know his background coming through Vietnam, that he was placed at Nellis Air Force Base right next to Area 51, and that he had to deal and interact with these tall white aliens, is interesting, because if we just think of this group right off the bat, you'd think, oh, they're tall white aliens. Well, maybe they're just offshoots of this advanced thing that Casey was referring to in the first place, which would explain their access to the technology. Now, it could be a group that crash landed here and then stayed on, and they never identify exactly where they're from in his conversations with them. They do seem to have a kind of disdain for humanity and a great kind of protective quality to their own, so that you could easily find yourself getting in the crosshairs of one of these tall whites, and it wouldn't be a pleasant scenario, according to Hall. And that's one of the reasons why they were either scared off, or the tall whites killed them, the other people who were interacting, doing weatherman work in Area 51. So there's an interesting story there. I think that if we start to connect the dots of the Cosmos Club, and we start to connect the Casey work around the Atlantean groups going into Utah, going into Nevada, and then we start to realize the great secrets that seem to come out of the Cosmos Club, and the fact that all of these incredible people, scientists, the top people of the day, are drawn in to meet with John Wesley Powell, who, like I said, was self-taught anyway. He wasn't even somebody who had like those Harvard pals and all the rest of it. So where is this incredible, yes, he was doing this yeoman's work of going down the Colorado River, but there's weird stories there too, which is three of the experts who go along with him, when they decide we're not going any further, they disappear. What did they see? Did they see the stuff along with them, and were they going to go back and tell a different story? I don't know. There's a lot of unanswered questions back there. I think when we get to the Cosmos Club, that if we can realize by the time it gets into the Kennedy era, and you have people like Donald Menzel who's playing a double role in his life, being a UFO debunker as a Harvard scientist in public, and behind the scenes offering Kennedy the help to, decipher the UFO file, you start to realize that all those meetings take place at a UFO Bilderberg. You have to have the same type of structure where people have the ability to get together for some other reason, we're going to have a great meeting about politics and astronomy. And then, meeting's over, you take the top 8 people, you get them in a room like the Bilderberg group does. You have to be able to manage the UFO file through a group that has a public-private aspect like the Cosmos Club. That's why I think when we take a story and we take it out of its own context, like the Tall White story, which always seemed to have some strong validity to it. He was there, he spent the time there, and his although the story is extraordinary, there's also something very practical about it, that the US military is working with their generals to extract more technology, and in exchange, they're keeping the anonymity cloud and giving the tall whites the things that they want. This is very interesting to me. And when we think about the legends, and this is something, of course, that John Wesley Powell spent all this time with the Native Americans to understand their legends about the Star People and all the rest. The Hopi Indians, he discovered, still use a large number of original Egyptian words in their language. Did they live alongside the ancient Egyptians in the Grand Canyon? Well, it's pretty interesting because what you find when you go deep on this is the support for it comes from people who are very experienced, like a former British agent named Egerton Sykes, who had really had the most vast knowledge around the Atlantean piece. And he said there was a Native American colony that was completely influenced by the ancient Egyptians in the American Southwest. So these things start to go together for me if we take that story and then we weigh it into Powell, and we see Powell going in and naming everything after these Egyptian names. Then you have the Grand Canyon story, and then you have the Cosmos Club as this kind of hub for secret technology conversations. All of this stuff starts to open up. And I've mentioned David Starr Jordan in there. Well, David Starr Jordan is the archaeologist. He's the Smithsonian guy who goes in there and finds this. And I'm sure somewhere they just, you can't mention this. And it brought me back to a story, which is something I covered in Pawgate, which is all about Augustus Le Plongeon, who is this psychic archaeologist. And he goes and he basically discovers ancient Mayan ruins in Mexico. Like most of the stuff that we know, Chichen Itza and all that, he discovers using psychic archaeology. Well, it's interesting because when you go into his story, he discovers how to speak the Mayan tongue, and they teach him the Mayan hieroglyphs. He goes back to the American Archaeological Association, and this is the 1880s. He says, I know how to decipher this. I found Chakmul, I've got the Sphinx on top of the temple and everything. I can crisscross the Egyptian culture with the Mayans. The Egyptian culture would call the Kichi. And he goes into all of it, and they don't want to hear any of it because in their minds, they're thinking, you can't equate these savage Indians with us. We're actually running them off and stuffing them into these reservations. So we're not going to take any of that. We're going to say these guys were totally primitive back there. They didn't have the wheel, that they could make fire and war and had human sacrifice. So that's where, when you get Graham Hancock saying we have a culture with amnesia, he's exactly right. But now let's take it into the UFO arena and start to say, maybe this idea that we just discovered the UFO file in 1947 is a little naive as well. Where's the group managing the UFO file previous? to that. That's when we start to get into some deep territory. With that, Miss Olivia, I'm off to your question.
Okay, Ratboy Genius. How many members of the Cosmos Club were Freemasons? And Space Ghost, is the Cosmos Club just the Mason Oddfellows under a new name?
A lot of the major characters that you find operating here are Masons. It's almost like there's rare exceptions, and if there are exceptions, they do belong to another group that is like the Odd Fellows. So the way that you're working through these different guilds, you're working through these different secret groups, and I think the mystery school aspect manifests itself in something that's already where the train tracks are already down. This is a really weird story about Gurdjieff, that when he was talking to Bennett, trying to give him some idea of how the mystery schools operated, Bennett was expecting, well, they're in a temple somewhere, worshiping the sun god or something. And Gurdjieff was telling them, no, that they're police chiefs, they're barbers. And he would point out to them the traditional aspects, So when we have things like Shriners and things of this nature, there's already something that's laid down there. There's a group that's going to operate. So what you do as a mystery society is you embed yourself in something that is already, in plain sight. So in Masonry, it's particularly good because superficially, there's so many people who just, join the Masons to have that community and the same type of value system and all the rest of it, have no idea about any of the esoteric aspects. I mean, they might think some of the rituals are weird, but in general, it's just it's like a group, a club, but then we know that there's a much, much deeper level involved with dealing with that. But when you get into mystery schools and mystery societies, the way that Steiner and Gurdjieff, people of this nature, have described them, they are embedded like in our everyday lives, so that it's just as we study steganography in this program, there's a steganography to their activities. They're involved, they're moving the culture forward. And, we have these kind of ideas that are, say some people have entertained angels unawares, right? It's pretty interesting, that superstition. Where did it come from? And other people think, well, there have been aliens involved in key incidents. There's some other unseen force, as the Casey readings refer to them, that is operational, and it goes into all types of different levels. I remember one time when he was giving a reading, Casey was giving a reading, and there was a guy who could just completely acted like he was being possessed. And so Casey is giving him a reading and says, oh, what happens is the alcohol that he takes into his system opens up his Kundalini force and entities slip in. And there's people in the 1930s listening to this. What do you mean entities? And Casey says, well, discarnate entities. They're like, what's a discarnate entity? It's basically a dead person who's still hovering around. And, in this case, they still enjoy the idea on the astral plane of getting drunk. So when someone gets drunk like that, and so they said, how do what can we do to get this out of his system? He said, completely stay away from alcohol. One, for this guy, not in general. He didn't say everyone had to stay away from alcohol, just for this guy who's, being like a heavy drinker. And he said that you had to use gold in order to, and he had a whole appliance. There were these appliances where there'd be a gold solution. And he also said lying on Virginia Beach, there's a high concentration of gold in the sand on the beach. It's pretty interesting because, they said, well, what are discount entities? And he was saying, well, it's those who passed into the other realm. And they said, how did they, come to him or whatever? And he said, oh, there's always, on the good side and the bad side, and spiritual discarnates and, other discarnates. there are thousands about us, and they're always seeking expression. There's thousands about us here right now. So there's thousands of unseen things around you at any time, and they take on the colors, good and bad, depending on the type of environment that you're creating for them. So just keep that in mind as we go along here. Yes.
Okay, so back to the Cosmos Club. Koldas, he says, can you ask Daniel if the Cosmos Club was originally or later on became a mystery school, but for the elite? And Black's Parson says UFO secrecy is undoubtedly governed by secret oaths and secret proceedings.
Oh, I agree. Well, there's something very deep. I'm going to reveal a lot about the Cosmos Club going forward. I've put some things on the record about them that were just missing, I think. And I think that they've been, a mystery even for the people who were involved with them. It's interesting. Carl Sagan, I mentioned, was a member who they tried to, he barely hung in there after they got rid of Hynek. But he has a quote which I think is very valuable when thinking about this. And I put it aside for tonight. One of the saddest lessons of history is this. If we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we've been taken. Once you give a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back. Think about that in relation to the UFO threat piece we put forward here. You already went through the COVID op. That was giving power to charlatans. We saw a lot of people hand over their power. We saw a lot of people who aren't around anymore do that as well. And then a lot of reports and things coming out now about, this in relation to the Pfizer documents. And this is going to get more explosive as time goes along. But I think that this is an important thing for us to keep in mind in this particular track of history that we're on, because, we see this all the time with there's some kind of formatory problem in people's psyche about admitting to the fact that the media has taken them for a ride, that the government has taken them for a ride, and forming something new and not continue to fall into that. I was listening to basically a talk show thing where they were defending the Ukrainian war, and the people involved, actually, they've bought the media line so much. There's nothing in there about if America should be involved in a peace process. There's nothing in there about, did us saying that we were going to make Ukraine NATO, which would, in essence, put nuclear forces on the border with Russia. And was that a provocation? There was nothing in there about any question about anything. It was all about, the evil Putin went in there. And, there's a whole narrative about that. And it's just, we're over there. We're so great because we're fighting evil Putin and all the rest of it. In the meantime, the defense contractors are getting really fat, and a lot of Ukrainians, over 350,000 of them, are dying for what? And then, on the Russian side, this is a terrible thing as well. And I don't think that they should be in there at all. But, where is the balancing aspect of like a worldwide peace process, American-led peace process? Instead, now we're giving them some of the worst weapons ever used that are banned in 100 countries in Europe. I mean, come on. So we've taken a completely wrong turn in America. And so that's why we have these forces, I think, coming through. And that's where you see, the timing, the RFK Jr. coming in. And it is, RFK Jr. is his own man, but it is the Kennedy spirit. It's the Kennedy legacy coming through. And what did Kennedy do? He navigated us through a nuclear war. Basically, he prevented one. He saved the world, And that vision of freedom, I think, that he had for the world is exactly the thing that's channeling through Bobby. But it's 2023 after all. And the way that comes through, is that totally unique thing that he brings to the table right now. That's why there's a lot of momentum behind him, when really under ordinary circumstances, there shouldn't be. Yes.
Rick, Was there an overlap between Majestic 12 and the Bilderberg Group? And Jay Lizard, question, do you think there is someone in Bilderberg who gets messages from aliens and these messages are announced at the event? I love this question.
I think there's taking the end of that part first, that question. There is some groups on that side deep in the machinery that definitely seek unseen forces to lead them. There's a whole process involved. That's where we get the Ahrimanic thing that Steiner is telling us about the spirit of Ahriman guiding these people. And Ahriman is super scientifically materialistic. And that's where the whole mystery school split happened, when they saw this coming in and they said, it won't take long for Ahriman to split off humanity from its spiritual understanding, so that the only thing they will think about is what can be weighed and measured, which is a totally just one aspect of the world. So they're in touch with these beings. Casey called it Belial in the Atlantean period. And there's good reason to believe that people like Epstein and Maxwell were trying to regenerate Belial, contact Belial. When we see things like CERN, CERN's not the only one, but that's kind of one that's been identified this way. And the occult mixed with the scientific, there's no question that there's some, there's some superstition and some occult knowledge inside of these groups, and that they're trying to conjure up their master. So if you want to call that and say it's an alien talking to them or whatever, it is alien for sure. Whether it's an extraterrestrial is another question. Yes.
Gigi Young says cybernetic seances.
Yes, that's exactly it. And those have been going on. Remember, there's a whole trade of them, the Macy conferences, which Gigi and I covered. That's going back to maybe 2.5 years that we did an episode on those. And the Macy conferences are like the Orphic Circle aspect rolled from the 1860s and 70s into the 40s and 50s. And they were doing seances in New York at the Macy conferences, building up the scientific infrastructure to create automatons, and Casey did us a tremendous favor by telling us about the automatons because he basically, he was giving us the whole technology that the Atlanteans had to develop robots, and said there was a problem, there was a question about it. And you might think, well, what would be a question or a problem about robots? Well, when you think about what they talk about now, they're mixing, right? They're augmenting a human as a cyborg. Well, that's where the nature of the problem comes in, because you have some human parts to this thing and you have cybernetic parts to it. So you're inviting a soul to inhabit a thing that's not fully human. The last time that happened, it was a disaster and almost completely disrupted any kind of evolutionary plan for humanity. And that's where Casey brings in the whole thing about Rata and the pyramids and Hermes and them creating this whole structure to get those things and to have them over generations become fully human with a full endocrine system and all the rest. Well, that's a huge leap, one giant step for man. And so when we think about it that way, that he's giving us a lot by laying out the Atlantean aspect and the interminglings that the scientists had done. And people in the Casey era, one, they were freaked out in the 20s and 30s to hear about this and didn't understand it. Two, the institution that carries on his legacy, the ARE, wonderful people, but they, I think they're very uncomfortable with Casey's Atlantean work, which is edgy as anything, way edgier than anything around Atlantis from anybody else. And he has the Atlantean ships going through mountains, it's total apotheum. He has the Atlanteans going anywhere in the universe by thinking about it. it's like this super psychic race operational on planet Earth. That's pretty edgy stuff. Way heavier than any kind of alien, dropping in, so that level of disclosure is pretty happening. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to link these two. Najat Madre, could all the rituals these groups do be a way of summoning something to get the direction to serve their master? And Nick Malone, who controls X-Protect? Defense industry, parallel civilization, or Belial Group?
Well, see, it's interesting because the first question, talk about synchronicity, is what I just said, right? This is an interesting thing about what is it, X-Protect, remember, has a mystical side to it. This is why when we think about traditional, the CIA does, they have hit teams and they have all this other stuff. But there's a whole other unit that deals with mysticism and things of this nature, conjuring, teleportation, astral projection, all these types of things. The group that I was able, because John Keel did such unusual work, the group that I was able to identify through his work, because of his work around the Men in Black, are the Sami. And the Sami, if you really go into their history, and I think it's completely neglected, it's a gigantic subject of study. And even for the things I've read about it, I feel like I understand it very little. But I will say this about it. The Sami are probably some of the best psychics on the planet, period. And they kept themselves away from the society and such. And I think that they were able to live in that much closer relationship with the spiritual, with the regular planetary world. So they were known to have abilities to do things like that. So when you hear those stories about the Men in Black and their unusual qualities and how they disappear and all the rest of it, it was funny. I was watching Dan Aykroyd, and he was talking about his history and stuff. And I was thinking of that story that he told about seeing Men in Black when he had a series that he thought was going to be a huge hit on UFOs. And he tells the story about talking on the phone with Britney Spears. And he's talking to her. She's going to be a guest on Saturday Night Live. They've called him back to do it. He's already shot 12 of these episodes for this new series. They've given him tons of money. And then he looks over while he's on his cell phone. And this is like 2004, maybe 2005. And he sees the Men in Black. And the Men in Black are decked out exactly like they would be expected to. And they have like this perfectly new 1940s car and all the rest of it. And they're giving him a real menacing look, so much so that he feels like, he's in danger, basically. And then he turns and they're gone. Then he goes upstairs. He ends the call with Britney Spears. And the producer of the show says, oh, the whole project's been canceled. But don't worry, we'll figure out a way to salvage the episodes. They never did.
They've never been seen?
No, I think they might, he might have put some kind of indication about what they were out there, but they never were on, like, I think it was an NBC show or something. So he put, no, it was the Sci-Fi Channel. He put the whole thing together. So that's pretty interesting, and then you say, and you say to yourself when dealing with the stuff, see, there are just some things that remain mysteries, and there's no congressional committee that's going to wave a flag and give you any stronger version of reality. And so this whole thing about the Sami and the idea that groups like X-Protect, which come out of intelligence and are set up to protect the UFO file from any exposure, except for the type of exposure they want to give it, like the false disclosure piece, then you're looking at something different, because the X-Protect group is not just a gang of assassins and psychological operations. They do the full gamut. And that's why you hear so many of these stories and why they're so very strange. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is a special report for you. The Cosmos Club, UFO Bilderberg revealed. And we're going to do more revealing of this crisscross with this Cosmos Club and some of the UFO hearings and things that we're seeing going on. We're going to take a couple more of your questions before we wrap up tonight. Before we do that, I want to remind you to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for a free newsletter, especially if you're new here. That's the only way to really stay in touch. The social media networks don't always grace you with notifications when we're on, and there's a lot of heavy, hardcore censorship that gets applied, especially during an election cycle and with some of the issues that we cover in this program. So make sure you're signed up for that. You're going to learn all about the incredible episodes, the return of the X series coming up later in July, and incredible, remarkable interviews that we have coming up for you as well. Documentaries, events, the whole gamut. Stand up and be counted. Sign up at darkjournalist.com. Miss Olivia, give us your best 3 questions.
Okay, T-Star Illuminations again. Do you think there are time travelers?
Yes, I think time travel is a possibility. I'll tell you what's interesting is someone asked earlier about T.T. Brown's daughter, and I had a number of conversations with her about his work. And one of the things that happened to him was he was at a prep school. It's the same prep school that Donald Trump went to, in fact. And but this was earlier, and he was with his horse, and he saw an orb over the lake at the school. And he looked at it, and it came full force at him at high speed and knocked him down and freaked his horse out. So while he was down dealing with this, dazed and confused, the orb showed him his entire life, what was going to happen and all the things he would do. And basically he got the understanding that he would be involved in moving humanity forward on all these different levels. And he felt like the orb was some kind of other intelligence. And in my opinion, his fascination with UFOs later came directly from this experience. But later he developed something that could do the same thing, that someone could be in front of it and they would get that glimpse as well. So there's obviously some kind of stream of time. Now, there are choices and things that take place there's free will involved. I've never felt that everything was pre-programmed like that. But, I guess I've had dreams about time travel, like time traveling to different periods of time. And when I'm there, I feel like I understand that, it's funny. There's a book called The Strange Life of Ivan Ossikin that Ouspensky wrote. And it's all about eternal recurrence. You go back into the life that you had and it starts all over again. But for him, it starts when he gets thrown out of school and all these progressively bad things happen to him, all to the point where he gets, his life unravels and he decides, I want to kill myself. And then it always ends up at the same place and he goes back to the beginning. And in one of these recurrence things, he meets Gurdjieff and Gurdjieff, the magician. And the magician says, I can send you back consciously to the same place where the school incident happens. I can send you back in your life, but you won't be able to change anything unless, you basically study these principles. And he's like, I don't care what it is. Just send me back there. I'll be able to do it. Even if you think I can, I will. And he gets back there and he's back at school about to be expelled. And he is going through the process and going through the motions, and he starts to see these people and all the rest of it. And he notices the absence of certain people in the recurrence, which I think is pretty interesting. But one of the things that happens to him is when he's going through this process of the recurrence, he realizes over and over again when he comes up to these moments where he has the ability to remember what happened last time he did that, he still makes the same mistake. So,
well, this is because he's coming from the same level of consciousness.
Yes.
I've heard you tell the story before, and it just was so obvious to me that what he should have done was go back and meditate. Really, if he had shifted his consciousness, he
Yes.
would have had the power to adjust his behavior and his choices.
Well, he
But
wanted to be
Mhm.
bailed out. There's no question. It's a deep thought, and I agree with you. I think it was the level that hadn't changed. But you know what's funny about it?
Mm?
If you think about it, after a while, the magician and everything starts to feel like a weird dream back there. And all the people that he met later, they all just fade out. I kind of think that time travel is like that. I think that if you go somewhere else, you just sort of drift into the time and become subject to it, and you have an identity there, and that's it. After a while, the other stuff seems like a dream.
Yeah, there's also with a lot of these people who are having near death experiences, they really talk about how all time is one time. That's one of your sayings, and that all of this is happening all at once anyway. That we perceive it as linear, but in actuality, we live these parallel lives,
Oh, yeah.
and that there's impact constantly with all of them. This is why you can actually quote impact quote a past life in this life and heal it and it's so metaphysical, it's
Interesting.
so cosmic and so cool, and it's just a mind bender to contemplate all of it. Anyway.
I think when you get around, yeah, that's really true. I always look for information like that. I think the mystery school aspect, when you bump up against it, it's it's the most mysterious because the knowledge and the wisdom in somebody like Ouspensky, a student came to Ouspensky and said, "Why should I do all of this mystery school work to become a better person when I'm surrounded by bombs dropping and the Germans invading Britain and everything like that?" And he said, "Well, you'll find the more aware that you become that the conditions around you change." So I thought about that one for a while and I was like, is he saying that literally the higher your consciousness gets, the more you lift yourself out of the chaos of the world? You're not even subject to the reality that's going on. It's pretty interesting when we get into
Mm,
that. But what do you think of that?
I absolutely 100% agree with that. So I want to ask this question. We've gotten into cosmic territory. Ellison Ballard, what is this need for control? Why? The need for power over everything. This is the crucial question, is who are we? What are we doing here? What is this game of life about anyway?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a good question for you. What do you think it is?
I think power is all of it. This is what we're here for. And I think actually, I immediately thought about Groundhog Day. And that
Yeah.
which is all a metaphor for reincarnation, that and he
Ah.
goes through all the different attempts to control, this is about power, his destiny, taking advantage of the situation, then being despairing. And so what are we here doing anyway? I once when I was stoned many years ago, I had the realization that we were mini gods. We were gods in training, baby gods. And the point is to learn how to use to gain power
Stoned on Kakichka tea
and
only.
and to use our power wisely, benevolently, because ultimately may not be true, but I like this idea as a working hypothesis that we are going to be able to eventually, way down the line, create our own universes and be the gods of our own.
Ah.
And if so, we better be responsible with power. So we need to learn it gradually, carefully, conscientiously, but we're allowed to have free will and experiment. So
Mm.
power is the name of the game, ultimately.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that there's too much desire for power, and that in fact,
That's power over. Power, no, all of us
yeah,
desire power. But we need to, I want as much empowerment as I can handle responsibly.
yes,
It's
yes.
that people want power and they don't care about the impact. That's the problem.
Wow, that's really true. A couple of alien things, and then we'll take your final questions.
Okay.
All right, since this is a big kind of alien component to this episode. All right, I've mentioned meeting Charlie Fultz accidentally years ago, and he was involved in the Allagash incident. And when they were abducted, he and these two twins from Mass Art, one of them developed epilepsy, which is how they all remembered the incident. But this was the figure that greeted them when they were abducted in the Allagash. The Allagash is really dense part forest up in Maine, which you have to actually helicopter into. And what guys do is they go in there and they have a fishing trip. So they'll helicopter in and you do all this fishing, and then the helicopter picks you up after 3 days there. So this is the being that they encountered, and I asked him questions about it, and it was interesting, his interactions with it. And the 2 teachers were terrified, basically, and they kind of thought it was evil. And but Charlie Fultz said, basically, I got the impression of, like, you know, a science assistant who was doing a job, taking his various tests and all that. There was something very kind of straight ahead about the whole situation. It wasn't evil. It wasn't good. It was actually just, doing its job, and got us back to shore. They had missing time and all kinds of stuff. But a terrifying experience, and seeing the others and himself naked, while these beings were doing this. And one of the things I've mentioned is that one of the teachers had a great line. He said that, basically it looked like an insect in spandex, right? So something about the alien piece I want us to remember and keep in mind in terms of the reality of it. Forget about, Gary Nolan and Elizondo, all this junk. But think about how you would respond if you actually saw something like that. This could be worthwhile to think about. What type of response you would have when you look at some of these images. Bud Hopkins, who I've pointed out before, he did the book Intruders. He was kind of important, I think, the level of research that he was doing. And before he got involved with the alien abduction piece, which I think he did remarkable work on, he was an artist, and the X steganography in his art is really incredible. This is called Guardian X, and it's a kind of abstract piece. But I think it's interesting when artists get involved with this, just like the mass art twins. There's something about this aspect of the brain interacting with that reality that gets us into interesting places. Other pieces from this world, Betty and Barney Hill, that's their own drawing of the craft. No special drawing, no artist, no nothing. That's just them drawing what they thought the craft looked like. And it looks like a pancake, as Barney said on a few occasions. And I think instinctually, you can tell when you're dealing with this that these aren't, they're not lying, whatever it was that they encountered. John Mack, who I mentioned earlier, the Harvard psychiatrist who put his job on the line and all the rest of it, but did this very high level of work around the UFO file, getting, leaps and strides beyond anything like the stuff we're seeing now. But it's pretty interesting. What he got to really decidedly was that there is a major consciousness aspect involved with the alien phenomena. That's something for us to keep in mind. That's a picture of him, and there's some kind of alien pranksters going on there. But that's Leslie Kean at the table with him, and it's interesting to think of how Kean now is very much involved in something very different from, Bud Hopkins, who was her partner, who she doesn't mention, who's passed away now, and Mac, who was doing this totally differently. She's just on this weird trip about the military superiority aspect of, the Tic Tac or whatever, and pretending to roll out these whistleblowers who are CIA people. So it's interesting to see how different people have responded to this. And by being in that role, she has got, Netflix things. She's doing a biography of Lou Elizondo on HBO. They might have canceled that now.
Let's hope.
But isn't that something? So don't forget, as we go into this subject, that the kind of incredibly coiled mystery of the whole thing is palpable right in the middle of it when you start to think about it. And that the government aspect coming in, the disinformation piece, people pulling for money and position. It doesn't have anything to do with the phenomena at all. And, there's nothing to be learned there except how to watch people, show their true colors and also to watch how a psychological operation is run. So remember, there's a real difference between the real hardcore UFO file research and this CIA disclosure circus that we're watching. The more we separate those two and realize they're two totally different entities, that's a much better reality we're going to get to. With that, Miss Olivia, your last question.
Okay, so this is what I'm going to end on. Scott Cowsland, DJ, what do you think of the idea that the majority of alien abductions are actually astral abductions?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mentioned Mac, and he was teaching people how to astral project as a way to protect themselves from being abducted. I think it makes a lot of sense, in fact, but there are physical abductions as well. So I don't think there's any getting away from that. But people, when they do ayahuasca and things, will encounter beings that seem exactly like the Greys. So there's some kind of reality level, and I think there's a way to articulate it that when you experience something, there's a sense for it, and there's nobody who can explain something for the deep feelings that you have. So words sometimes don't do the thing justice. And that's how I think abduction experiences are. You can never really analyze them from a cold scientific place and be like, well, they did skin grafts on this person, and they were involved with, there's obviously something that gets into reproduction when it comes to alien abduction. And I think it is significant quite that the quantity and the attention around abductions has dropped dramatically, almost to nothing. From, what I remember growing up, it seemed to be all over the place. So I think Olivia was big on the concept that they saw the vax coming, they saw the industrialization of the human being, and they were like, let's get them at their best, before all this interference happens.
You don't want poisoned sperm, eggs, hybrid children. That's it. I mean, that you want pure human DNA.
Interesting.
Obviously.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. All right, you're up. Your last question.
That was the last question. Oh. Unless you want another one.
Nicely done. Yeah, let's finish off. Go ahead.
Okay, actually, I'm going to end on this one. So where can, Scott Cowsland again, is how put off in the Cosmos Club? The question is, how can people find out who is in the Cosmos Club? Is is it all public? Is it a list? There's no shame. They're not hiding away.
No, there is, but sometimes people are members and then later you find out about it. So no, there is a public list, but I'm sure there are members of the Cosmos Club which aren't public, but they might not say that. So, I've listed a good deal of them here. A comprehensive list, I think, can be found. They have the Cosmos Club website and all the rest of it. And I think that, as I've pointed out about other groups, there might be the vast majority of the Cosmos Club that knows absolutely nothing about the things that we're talking about, that they're, joining up to get better connections, to get closer to this or that millionaire or whatever it happens to be. So, I don't think that what I do think happens, and I think it's traceable by history, is that the networking environment at the Cosmos Club is the best candidate for UFO Bilderberg. And I did that after looking at a number of groups. It seemed to me that one had the real genesis of the entire UFO file. So fundamentally thinking, John Wesley Powell is out there, he's going through these different places in Utah, Nevada, and Wyoming, and all these different places. And he encounters, let's say, some incredible ruins of an advanced technology, or at least indications of an advanced technology. And then what happens with that? There's no function for it. It becomes the secret property of the United States government, and they continue to fund him to do all kinds of things along that line. And it just so happens that at Cape Girardeau or Aztec, the sky is right in the middle of it. You know, there's a real signature with the Cosmos Club, and I think we've just started to open it up. And I think it's interesting to consider the fact that JFK quit. Well, wasn't he someone who was assassinated over the UFO file? Yes. Because he was for sharing it and moving the culture forward, and the groups that wanted to hold the secret in the wall of secrecy no matter what couldn't allow that to take place. So it's pretty interesting that on the record as president, he quit the Cosmos Club. And there are all kinds of reasons people can deduce. They could say, well, it was a male only thing. They didn't have a broad policy racially or whatever it is. I don't believe that those are the genuine motivators. And I think the Kennedy got out because he felt, the very word secrecy is repugnant in our society. We decided long ago that the efforts to conceal basically take away the root principles of what make us a republic in the first place. And with that, I think we learn a great deal from President Kennedy on that one. Miss Olivia?
Okay, I'm going to actually throw you. This is a really great question. Habeas Corpus Canada. If we captured alien tech and have reverse engineered it, why is Elon Musk still testing and, quote, crashing and burning his Starship? What is this show?
Yeah.
It's a very expensive piece of theater.
Farrell makes a great point about the claims that are made by SpaceX about being able to do X things with chemical rockets, like mining asteroids with chemical rockets or going to Mars with chemical rockets. It's not possible. So you have an advanced technology in the background there, and how much they're willing to roll it out. When you roll out that technology, it becomes the property of everyone, including Russia. So part of the thing with Russia is Russia didn't go along with what was going on here, and they had their own advanced UFO file and space program. So they represent a threat and a problem on a number of different levels for that upper echelon. And so for me, they can't consolidate. There's no way to make it a one world thing if Russia's out. So this is where I think things like SpaceX get interesting. I'll tell you what's weird. Musk, if you track him now, especially, he's talking about how phones aren't safe, and yet he wants to make X everything. X is your everything app. It's going to do everything for you. Well, if phones are unsafe, you keep pushing that, people won't want to use X for everything. So what are you doing? That's where I think Neuralink is going to be merged with what he's doing. And the everything app is going to be, and just think it, stick it in your brain, you think it, and you'll have it. Right. So you'll think about ordering DoorDash or something, and that's it. So it's an incredibly pernicious thing that they're rolling out with Elon and all the rest of it. And, he's come in and been like, we should have a better society and free speech and all this stuff. And there's no question that somebody read the tea leaves on that. But just like all of a sudden, Jack, who was the head of Twitter, and through his meetings when he went to Davos, they said, I don't care what you do, you have to make sure that this election doesn't get swung to Trump. And how he cut off the New York Post from posting their article about Hunter Biden's laptop, and all these CIA people got on the scene. That was all Jack. He was all about intense. And that's Jack Dorsey, who was the CEO for Twitter. Intense, hardcore censorship. Now, Dorsey, I think, got threatened in those things about what to do. So then they had to reemerge and rehabilitate his character after it got exposed. And he said, I didn't know all this censorship was going on, which is ridiculous. He's the CEO. He's the responsible officer of the company. So what he did is he's come back now. He has a new company, a new social media company. And he's like, I'm right behind RFK Jr. Free speech, baby, all the way. And, he gets on and he's like, I've always been about free speech. I can't believe what happened to Twitter, and it's like he was the one who oversaw it. So it doesn't make any sense. It's very strange. Now, the next thing he did is he went out there and he quoted JFK and he said, I'm going to smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces. And he's like, amen. And he shows a picture of Kennedy. And this is kind of sick stuff. This is Davos created illness. And these people seeing if they can get enough into your head and get enough into your good graces so that they can pull, the Neuralink out. So you stick the chip in your brain and it controls everything that you do. And they might make it a much simpler thing by then. But here's the question to ask, and it's an open question because I don't have the answer on it. But why is Musk pushing against phones if he wants to do X, the everything app, and have it be everything? Remember, X is the X steganography for the advanced technology. What is he talking about? What is going to be living with you? If it's not a phone, it'll have to be something. How are you going to interact with it? Apps are on your phone, right? Or your laptop, I guess. But that's a question. So yeah, I sense there's a lot of tricky shiftiness going on at Twitter. And, remember, he's not even CEO of Twitter. Not really. It's, he's a person who has been put in as the richest man in the world. And it's how many people are running the show there. I mean, running that thing that we call Elon Musk. That's a really good question. Okay, Miss Olivia, you're up. Super chatters.
Okay. Let me take a look. Okay. Ricardo Petrazzi, Eurythmy is Fun, Bobo the Clown, Plato Always Knew, Sun Hero, Les Scott, Terry Doherty, Gillenjoy R, I'm Not Dead Yet, PJ Doe, Compliziert, Griffin Eagle 7, Jay Parsons, Jay Lizard, Northern Lights, Global Atlantis, Scott Cowsland, Jenny Runco, Prometheus Beard, Troubadour 2, Nunn, Robert Scott, Don Neway, The Daves I Know, Seeing Sights, Jennifer Walters, Lou Dontole, Just Loafing Around, It's a Doughboy Life, Madavi Gill, Peter Rabbit, Erica Swenson Elliott, Michael Snow, and Susan Blackstone. Thank you so much for your generous super chats.
Amazing. Wow, great. We appreciate your support. And to all our subscribers, unbelievable. We couldn't do it without you. We will be back with you next week. Very exciting interviews and more important reports coming up for you. I'm going to do a couple of shout outs here.
Did you share the Gleason picture?
Oh, right. That is Gleason's wife, who told the story twice on the record about how President Nixon showed Gleason at a facility, Air Force Base in Florida. Remember, MacDill is in Florida. And that Gleason couldn't eat for weeks after seeing them. So that's,
was there one dead alien? Were there two?
No, there were more than one.
Mm-hmm.
But
did he say what they were? Were they in liquid? How were they preserved? Do you know?
Yeah. There's a whole thing about how he said it, but they were in fluid, and he said he told her they looked like children.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole thing is pretty wild because we know that Gleason had a genuine fascination with the UFO file. You can go back, and there's a guy who was around, Long John Nebel, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and he was the old Art Bell before Art Bell came out. And Jackie Gleason was on all of his programs talking about UFOs, and really in an articulate fashion, like absolute amazement. And he had his house built to, he had this incredible architectural UFO house. And later on, he also confirmed to someone at the end of his life in an interview that Nixon had done this. But people didn't take that seriously. But the other two of Beverly saying it, she said one to TV Guide, and then there was another magazine that was like a celebrity magazine where she repeated the story. So she's on the record twice saying that Nixon stole away from Secret Service, and as a show off, because he knew that Jackie was really into the UFO file, wanted to show him the somewhat dead alien. But, it is interesting because Jackie Gleason he's kind of interesting anyway. If you think about him, like there's something strangely psychic about him, the way when he talks about things. I always felt that when I listened to him. So there was always a deeper aspect with the guy. And, he was somebody who he was a comedian and all these other things, but very often people who are in that profession have this deeper intellectual side that doesn't get expressed. And so he had all these very deep ideas. And I have no doubt at all that that story is exactly true the way that she told it. So God bless her for putting it on the record. And with that, let's see, we've got Bahri. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for being with us. Elon is a cutout for the divine serpent. That's pretty interesting. Huh. I can believe that. He's talking about making a phone, but he's also saying phones aren't safe. So it's weird. I think he's talking about something else when he's talking about the X Everything app. I think it's an old top of the line. Have a great night and thank you. Najat Madri, great show tonight. Excellent. I know Gigi was out there. It's great to see it. The shows that Gigi has been doing are remarkable. So make sure you include Gigi Young in your YouTube search and go to gigiyoung.com. She's been doing incredible stuff around Lemuria, which is a deep aspect and an interesting take on the anthroposophy part. So make sure you catch that as well. We'll have her back on the show shortly, very shortly, along with some interesting stuff that she's been working on. Doyle Wayne, Jack did an important interview with Russell Brand. Huh. Yeah, I don't trust Jack. I don't trust him as far as I can throw him into his ice bath, which is, remember what was it? 7 ice baths a day?
God, it's weird.
What on earth?
You can't trust people at the time. You think like when
That's
people have enough
quirk.
money, right, that you can trust them because they're free, but they're not. And you can't trust people at the bottom either because they, don't feel safe either. They want to get up to a higher. It's very difficult for someone to be independent and sovereign.
It's one person, one day at a time.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree. Yeah. Love that story. Very cool. Yes. Thank you for being here with us. That is a wild story. I've always felt there was a lot in it, but also be careful what you ask for because, Jackie wanted to see all this stuff, but then when he actually saw it, he was so freaked out. It changed him and traumatized him. I mean, there's kind of a PTSD that takes place after. To the moon, Alice. That's it. Hume John. There you go. Traveling Riverside Blues Johnson. Jason May. Something about Oz in there.
I wonder if
Jen Passavant.
He may have felt better had he been able to share the information. I think it's holding the secret is painful.
Oh, yes.
I think that's it. He, of course, didn't have Twitter to go to or anything like that, but it would have been a relief for him. I think it's one thing to process it and but to process it alone in isolation. Because that I think made it worse.
Yes, absolutely. Karen Carpenter. Jason May. Well, also
Gleason needed the ideas room. That's great.
What's interesting is what would have happened to Nixon had Jackie revealed that. That would have been interesting. And then you see all those pictures.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That would have been incredible. Well, I don't know. They may have put him in an institution. You never know. How
that's right. Yeah. Well, that's where they should put Grush then, right? The CIA lying whistleblower institution. That's a good place. It would be overcrowded right now, let me tell you. And Lou can be like the nighttime superintendent. I'm taking over as the super. I ran ATIP. I can run this place. Unbelievable. Good point, Olivia. I agree. Whatever it was. Global technology. Thank you, sir. Technology is good as long as we use it, not abuse it. I mean, absolutely true. Northern Lights. Excellent point. Olivia's getting, you're getting the big shine on here. This is great. Black's Parson, Joe Liberal, El Kaider, John Hume, Gypsy Moon. It's great to have so many of you out there in the ideas room tonight. I know Kate's out there. We will see you all next week and have a fantastic weekend. And remember, I guess this is the 76th anniversary of Roswell's this week. Started so many of these wild things. We still don't have any of those answers. How do you like that? Life's just like that sometimes. We'll see you all next week. And remember, it says end broadcast, but you know, it never really ends. Absolutely. And never let it be forgot.
Once there was a Camelot. And
there can be again. So we'll see what happens. Bobby. Have a great night, everyone. We'll see you. And bye-bye. We love you.
Okay. God bless.